JSworld Conference 2024 has come to an end. We are well rested and we hope you enjoy all of the recap talks today. Today we're going to display all of the top talks that were taking place at JSworld Conference, a 3-day festival of tech for JavaScript engineers. We truly hoped that you enjoyed it if you were there in person, and if you didn't enjoy in person, please join us next year, obviously. The largest JavaScript gathering in the world took place on the 28th, 29th February and the 1st of March at Theater Amsterdam. It's a yearly or an annual gathering where we gather the top tier speakers within the world of JavaScript. This year we had the honor of receiving the creator of Dino and Node, Ryan Dahl, the co-founder of GitHub, Scott Chacon, the creator of Vue and Vite, Avenue. We had Angular core team member Minko Gachev. We had Google team presenting on the tech advances within Google, and many other speakers. We truly hope that you enjoyed it. We're going to display the top 15 talks out of the 50. Way too many to display in one day, but do not worry. If you're missing out on any talks, or if you feel like that some of the talks are missing that you really wanted to see back or replay, go to JSworldConference.com where you can replay all of the videos. So go to JSworldConference.com if you would like to look back at all of the amazing videos that took place during JSworld Conference 2024. Enjoy today. Very excited to introduce to you our first talk of today, web development at Google. At JSworld Conference, we had the honor to welcome the Google team, 3-person strong, consisting out of Hussein, who also spoke at vuejs Amsterdam, Jatin, and Minko. Minko you might know because he's an Angular core team member. Please enjoy the talk, Web Development at Google, where they will walk you through all the aspects of web development at Google. Highly anticipated talk, top voted within our JSworld Conference app, so we hope you enjoy it, and let us know if you have any feedback.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Minko. I lead product and DevRel for Angular at Google. Today in this presentation, Hussein, Jatin, and I are going to share with you more about the frameworks that we're using for web development at Google, and also how are we supporting these frameworks and the ecosystem outside of the company. So first, we're going to talk about an internal framework called vuejs that has been innovating in the web performance space for a while. For example, it powers Google search, and performance there is pretty critical. After that, we'll talk about Angular, which probably you're familiar with. And at the third part of the talk, we're going to cover how we are supporting these frameworks and external technologies as well in terms of web performance. Before that, just to set the stage, at Google we have multiple groups that are interested in web development and the web platform overall. We have Chrome that has been pushing the web forward for a while now, just in different ways, web browser, web standards, and supporting web frameworks as well. We have Angular, that is a popular JavaScript framework. We have the vuejs team also, that has been being used in like all the billion user products of Google. So it has been really focused on performance for a while. And we have a couple of other groups. For example, Flutter Web is also interested in the web platform, making web applications available in the web browser. We have the Material team and others. Today, in this presentation, we're primarily going to focus on the story from the perspective of these first 3 teams. Now, without further ado, I want to pass it to Jatin, who's going to be talking about vuejs.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jatin. I'm an engineer at Google, and I work on the vuejs team. And I'm here to tell you a little bit more about this web framework. vuejs is used to make a lot of products at Google, among them Google Search, and also other stuff like Photos, the Play Store, and Google Drive, and so on. It's easy to tell if your favorite Google product uses vuejs. Just pull up the HTML of the page and look for one of these attributes: JS Action, JS Model, JS Controller, or JS Data. If you see one or more of these HTML attributes on the page, that means that application is using vuejs. It's used by thousands of developers inside Google every day, and billions of end users use products made by Wiz on a daily basis. So why does Wiz exist? The primary focus of Wiz is performance. Server-side rendering matters when you want to make a performant web application. And Wiz focuses heavily on making really fast server-side rendering happen. A lot of our users are on low-end constrained devices, which means the amount of JavaScript that is loaded and executed really matters. On a low-end device, you don't want to load like way too much JavaScript and have the device groaning on. And last, a lot of our users are also on really slow networks, and the number of round trips that you make in order to make your application work on such networks really matters. And so you want to really think through and minimize the number of round trips so that the end users have a performant application. So how does Wiz do these things? The performance story of Wiz has 3 foundations. The first one is fast initial render. Server-side rendering in Wiz, the way it works, as soon as the request comes in, the server will start streaming HTML back to the browser almost right away, like the static parts of the HTML, the header, and so on. The second one is stable rendering. Wiz applications use the HTML as canonical DOM, and they ensure that the CSS of the page is available above before any of the components render to avoid a flash of unstyled content. And that way, the page doesn't shift around once it finishes loading. And the last, and possibly most interesting foundation, is instant interactivity. Wiz applications, through a combination of event replay and extremely fine-grained JavaScript loading, provide an instant interactivity experience, not unlike the one that was described by Shai in the talk earlier today. So let's talk a little bit more about that last piece, instant interactivity. So I'm going to walk you through an unoptimized client-side rendered application first to try to describe like the problem. A user loads the phone, picks the phone, they load a URL and navigate to it. The server responds with some HTML, right? Not all of it, but some of it. And then the browser starts loading the CSS and all of the JavaScript required to run the application. And then the JavaScript starts running. And if you're lucky, all of the data that's required to render that application is fetched in a single round trip. And so worst case, 3 round trips later, you finally have a completely rendered page, and the user can see what they came to see. This can be pretty suboptimal if the network is quite slow. So Wiz tries to solve this by saying, what if we could return an interactive page in the first round trip? In fact, as the HTML starts streaming, if the network is particularly slow and the user interacts with the page before the stream is done, the page will still be responsive, even though it's incomplete. And let's say that the user doesn't immediately interact and the page finishes streaming, then the framework will load only the business logic that's actually required based on what was rendered on the screen. For any component that was not rendered on the screen, the business logic is not even loaded. And even when the business logic is loaded, it's not run eagerly. It is instantiated and executed only when required. So a foundation for all of this to work is the event replay system. When the page is streaming, the event handlers are not actually attached. So what we have in Wiz is a tiny library that we call JSAction that sits at the root of the page, and it's listening to all of the events. So as an example, consider this really simple hierarchy, right? The JSAction is listening right there at the root on the body. The user taps on the button, and the browser's native bubbling kicks in, and so the event bubbles up, and then JSAction can finally respond to it. The way JSAction does that is it looks in the HTML for those attributes that I initially mentioned, JSAction, JSController. And so in this case, as it's looking, it finds an attribute on that button element called button controller. It loads the JavaScript chunk and just the dependencies of button controller if it's not already loaded yet. And if it's already loaded, it instantiates the button controller class and then calls a method on that class to actually have the event handler run. And what's important is because that is the point where we're running the event handler finally has a chance to respond and say whether the event should bubble or not. So we have a second synthetic bubble that happens. So any additional JS actions on the way can also wake up and respond. And so in this way, this event replay system ensures that even as the JavaScript for the event handlers are not there, the page is responding. And this is the foundation of instant interactivity. As you can imagine, because of this, the event binding syntax for any framework that wants to do something like this is pretty novel. And Vue is no exception. This is an example of a client-only rendered component in just some framework that's using TSX, right? So you kind of have this function, handle click. You have to obviously load the code for that, because all of it is just in one function. And then you instantiate that function and actually attach it using something like onClick equals the name of the function, right? Logically, you can imagine that maybe under the hood, the framework's doing like add event listener, click, onClick, right? And so till that line of code executes, the button is not interactive. You could keep clicking on it, nothing would happen. And so after server-side rendering the HTML, you have to wait for the JavaScript to load. You have to wait for execution to get to that point. And then finally, the user can actually interact with the page. So this is what I'm calling an interactivity gap in this picture. So how big is that gap? It depends on the amount of JavaScript that we need to load. And that is the amount of JavaScript that's required to hydrate the page. Imagine if there was an if condition in the template, and the button was rendered only if that if condition was true. When you load the JavaScript, you're going to load the other branch of the if as well, even though it's not actually going to run on the client side during hydration. We ran this on the server. We know that button is the one that's going to be rendered. But on the client side, to hydrate it, we're still going to load the branch that led to the span. So you can imagine, maybe we should just lazy load that entire chunk, right? What if we did that, then we don't need to ship that. But that kind of falls apart when you have cascading control flow. Because now if you just keep lazy loading at every border that you have an if condition, you're going to have like a waterfall. And that's no good. So the answer to how much JavaScript we need, unfortunately, often ends up being all of the JavaScript in the application. And this is a lot of JavaScript. And so the interactivity gap can be pretty big. This is an example of a Viz component that tries to do hybrid rendering. And this is the novel event binding syntax that I'm talking about. If you just look at brass tacks, all you want to do is say JS controller equals some name of the chunk that you want to load. This is like your entry point. And then JS action is just giving you some more information about what is the event that I'm interested in and what is the method that I should call. And with this information, you can have this event replay library actually load the button controller only if required. So you can imagine if the user doesn't even interact with the button, maybe you don't even load that business logic at all, thereby minimizing the amount of JavaScript that needs to run on those low-end devices. So the HTML kind of looks like this, and you have no interactivity gap. You do need to load the event handler to run it. This is not magic. However, the key point is there is no interactivity gap. So what that means is you can ensure that the user, that you're not dropping any events on the client side. And the second thing, you don't load more JavaScript than is actually required. When you load the button controller, you're not actually loading any other controllers that are on the page. It's just that one thing that's required to respond to the event that the user actually triggered. So the foundation of the performance story of Viz, fast initial rendering, stable rendering, and instant interactivity. These kind of map to core web vitals that my colleague Hussein is going to talk about in just a bit. So Viz is a closed source framework. It's not open source. And because of its nature, it faces some pretty unique headwinds. And I just want to quickly talk about the 3 big challenges that we're facing and what we're doing to try to overcome them. The first one is that it's quite different from popular open source frameworks. So when developers join Google and they have to learn this weird event binding syntax, they kind of face a challenge. There's a ramp-up time. So to kind of meet this challenge, Viz is becoming a little less opinionated. We're asking ourselves, what does it mean to build client-only components and provide a better developer experience if the user wants to build a component like a dialog that really only renders on the client? The second thing we're doing is we're trying to modernize our capabilities. As a 10-year-old framework, the age of the framework's really showing in the kinds of APIs that we have. And so we're working, for example, with the Angular team on creating a signals-based API to drive fine-grained updates and fine-grained code loading. Another challenge that Viz has is the developer experience does not meet industry standards. Part of the reason is because Viz does not do server-side rendering in JavaScript servers. Instead, we do server-side rendering in Java servers. And this means we kind of had a custom templating language that allowed us to do that. To make the authoring format more relatable, Viz is currently exploring using TSX as an authoring format while continuing to have the constraint that we should render in Java servers. And so that's a pretty unique challenge, and we believe if we can solve that, the resulting authoring format would be something that's very relatable to developers who've already been developing in the open source. And lastly, even though Google is a really big company, the size of the Viz community inside Google is pretty limited. And so when you run into trouble, it's hard to debug, and it's hard to find help when you need it. Googlers, when they are building Google Search, cannot use Google Search to solve their problems when they have a problem. And so they have to depend on this internal community. So we're trying to do two things. We're trying to increase the size of this internal community. We're hoping that if we become less opinionated, more developers inside Google will use Viz, and the size of the community will grow. And the second, we recognize that if we want to depend on the ecosystem outside, we have to start participating in it. Luckily, we have a lot of experience in that area. And to talk more about Angular, I want to call Minko back on the stage. Thank you. All right.
All right. Yeah, so Angular is the other popular framework at Google that is used by thousands of applications inside of Google. For example, Google Cloud. We have maybe about 14, 15 million lines of Angular specifically in Google Cloud Console, so it's a pretty big application. Also, externally, it has been used by KLM, Vanguard, Fidelity, and also some startups, for example, ClickUp, SpaceX, and others. One interesting thing about Angular is that it kind of bridges the gap between these two worlds, between Google and the external world. And we're in a good position to offer some inspiration for Googlers with some ideas from the external world, and also make some Google ideas open source. So historically, Angular and Viz have been serving different application segments inside of Google. Like Angular has been very much used for highly interactive applications. I already mentioned Google Cloud Console, Google Analytics, and others, where you have a lot of data visualization or forms. And Viz has been used for like very performance-focused apps, where you want to deliver your first byte as quickly as possible and load your JavaScript and make it as minimal as possible as well. However, over time, we see that these two worlds are kind of blending together. The more static applications, they keep adding more functionality, and their developer experience requirements increase. And the highly interactive applications, well, they have already a lot of JavaScript. And JavaScript is one of the reasons for our applications being slow, so we need to figure that out too. So we have been having I'm going to talk actually about two main areas of inspiration that Angular and Viz have been working on together and has been driving from each other. The first one is around signals. So Angular introduced the signals API, where we can pretty much declare a signal inside of an Angular component. We wrap this primitive world value as a signal. And the Angular template is going to end up getting compiled to JavaScript. So when we read the signal, signals have this great property to let us know in which function the signal was read. So when we update the signal, we can very easily go to the specific part of the template and update the minimum amount of UI, which is great. Angular didn't invent signals. They have been around for a while. For example, Vue, React has signals. And also, specifically on our signals library, we worked closely with Ryan so that we can learn from his experience. So thanks, Ryan. Another idea that we have been collaborating on with the Viz team is around deferred code loading. You learned about JS action, and you learned about the very finely grained code loading that Viz has. That is very implicit there in Viz, so it is lazy loading by default. And we worked on a primitive for Angular that makes it a little bit more explicit so that it can better fit the current state of Angular itself. So with deferred loading here, we can specify that we would like to deferredly load the list component, specifically when the placeholder enters the viewport. And this handles all the complexity around managing intersection observers and also loading states and much more. Traditionally, when we're doing server-side rendering, we would render the application on the server, and we're going to deliver the rendered HTML to the client. The browser is going to parse it, create the DOM, render it, fetch all the JavaScript, and hydrate. With the Aurora team, from Hussein is going to share more about it, we worked on full app non-destructive hydration in Angular, and this is how very frequently, commonly frameworks work nowadays. One problem is that if you have a lot of JavaScript, things can get pretty tricky. This could be a pretty slow process. So something that we have been exploring is partial hydration that uses a concept very similar to JS action. Now imagine you render the application, and you get just static HTML with very small piece of JavaScript with JS action without loading your application at all here. When the user engages with any particular component, we can figure out which component they engaged with. We can download only this particular component and hydrate only this part of the UI and make it interactive. This way, you have way less JavaScript to load, and this improves your core vitals significantly. Additionally, we can replay the event so that we don't lose it. All right, these are some of the features that Angular shipped lately. We additionally are working on fine-grained reactivity with these signals. We have Vite that, together with ESBuild, improved our build time with server-side rendering about 87% or so, and refreshed documentation and learning journey. So with this, we're feeling that we're entering kind of a new era for Angular. And actually, the community has been calling it the Renaissance. We want us to reflect that in the Angular's identity as well. So a couple of months ago, we refreshed the logo to make it a little bit more aligned with where Angular is heading. If you're interested, go check angular.dev. That's our new documentation website. All right, now I would like to pass it to Hussein, who's going to share more about how Google is supporting web frameworks in and outside of Google.
Thanks, Minko. Yeah, my name is Hussein Jerde. I am a software engineer on the Chrome Aurora team. And I'd love to continue where Minko left off to talk about how we collaborate with Angular, but with other JavaScript frameworks in the ecosystem as well. Aurora is the name of the very small team and initiative in Google Chrome that collaborates with open source frameworks and tools. The reason we do this is because we know that to make an impact across the web, we have to invest in improving the tools that millions of developers rely on and make them better and faster. In both Minko and Jatin's sections of the talk, I'm sure you all have noticed that many developers face very similar challenges, regardless of what framework they use. Things like, what rendering strategy should we use? How do we load the right fonts and scripts in the right way? How to optimize video and images? How to even host your application? And the list goes on and on. Generally, we recommend a lot of different approaches to developers on how to handle these challenges, like you should partial render, or you should chunk your JavaScript, and so forth. But what if frameworks as a whole could do all of this automatically? One of the features that we worked with the Angular team was the ng-optimized image directive. And the idea here is, with all the research we've done and a lot of the local lab experience we've done in the past, we've seen how much of an impact poorly optimized images can make on the web. So if you're an Angular developer, what if there was a directive that you could use that will automatically optimize the image for you? And that's the idea behind this specific directive. The nice thing about baking these type of features into an API like this is that we can also add other additional opt-in features. You want to actually prioritize a certain image because it's above your device fold, there's a priority attribute for that. And that'll signal to Angular to include the HTML fetch priority attributes and a preload tag on the server. So images are one thing that affects core vitals. But like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of other things as well, right? Fonts, third parties, rendering, and there's a whole list of things. The way we try to approach things in the Aurora team is we try to identify what the biggest issues are across the web, and then see if we can find some specific, useful features and then bake them into the frameworks themselves. Minko mentioned this as well, but we also collaborated with the Angular team on full-page non-destructive hydration. And the idea is we wanted to see if Angular could, instead of destroying and recreating the DOM every time it hydrates, what if it could use existing DOM nodes where possible? We helped them launch this feature, and applications that switched to server-side rendering with non-destructive hydration saw a 200 millisecond improvement in LCP, or largest contentful paint. This is between the 60th and 80th percentiles, but this is a pretty big win. And outside of just Angular, we've also collaborated with other frameworks as well. We also worked with the Next.js team to launch a very similar image component. If you're using Next.js and you want to have optimized images out of the box, import and use the image component, and automatically your images will be optimized, regardless if you're fetching a remote image or a local image. And again, the same idea happens here. We give a good default experience, but for specific use cases like, hey, I want to prioritize a certain image, there's a prop for that. And now I'm sure you all are starting to see a pattern. We also worked with the Nux team to launch something very similar. If you're using Nux, but you want to make sure all the images are optimized as fast as possible, make sure you install the Nux image module. And again, it'll do everything it can right out of the box. But if you want to specify additional things like I want to load certain images eagerly versus lazily, there's attributes for that as well. Another thing we've been quite invested in for the past year or so, and a part of work that I am actually very invested in personally, is how can frameworks optimize third-party scripts that any developer decides to inject? The tricky thing about third-party scripts is it's hard to optimize code that the developer isn't writing. So one thing that we rolled out for the Next.js framework was a component where instead of using the regular HTML script tag, you can automatically use this. The syntax is almost the same. And what it will do is it will load the third-party script after all the initial Next.js first-party chunks have been fetched. And we've also tried baking in more useful features that are more specific. If you wanted to delay the load of third-party scripts until browser idle time, you can use the strategy property and define a value of lazy on load. One thing that I'm actually working on now is extending this even further. One thing we've noticed is that a lot of developers using the script component are still kind of confused on what strategy to prop to use depending on the third party. So we decided, what if we built a higher level library, even though opt-in, that developers could use that will automatically optimize popular third parties? For example, using a YouTube embed. This is still experimental, and it's an opt-in library that you have to install, but it's only been out for a couple of months, and it has about 800,000 downloads. So a lot of developers are starting to see the use of this as well. We're also working with the Nux team right now on something very similar. Could there be composables and useful components that, when used, can automatically optimize popular third parties, like Google Analytics? The nice thing about this is we're using some neat lower-level Vue and Nux APIs to actually make some functionality easier. For example, waiting for the script to load to send a custom event. So all the things that I shared is just a glimpse of everything that we worked on. But one thing that I want to highlight is, for all the features that we bake in, we're trying to see if we can share the best ideas cross-framework. Because regardless of what framework you're using, these are all issues you're going to have to deal with on a daily basis. Hope you enjoyed this talk as much as we enjoyed giving it. Thank you.
Wow, mind-blowing. Web development at Google, I hope you enjoyed it. It was a truly inspiring talk to me, at least. Next up is the co-founder of GitHub, Scott Chacon. Scott also had his very own bar at the JSworld Conference after party. We hope you join him in person, and otherwise, perhaps, who knows, next year. Scott is going to dive deep into So You Think You Know Git Advanced. He's going to show you tips and tricks of what to do and what not to do with Git. Scott Chacon also has his own company nowadays called Git Butler, and they are also supporting us at JSworld Conference, where I just said indeed that they had their very own bar during the after party. It was a lot of fun. So if you weren't there, please make sure that you're there in 2025. I will not keep you any longer. Enjoy Scott's talk and let us know what you think in the chat over there or over there. I'm never sure where it is. Thank you.
It's nice to be here. I have to warn you, I am not going to be talking about Web3 or crypto or AI. I'm going to be talking about really boring, just Git command line bullshit. So I hope that you guys use Git on the command line, because otherwise this is going to be pretty boring talk, and it's a little bit nerdy. But I've been giving talks on Git for, I don't know, 15 years now, for sort of as long as I've been professionally using Git. And I've been talking about Git again more recently. I've been doing it for a long time, but more recently I found out that a lot of people have been using, how many people, raise your hands if you've never used anything other than Git as a version control system? Okay, so this is a different generation than when I first kind of was giving talks like these. And so I thought it was kind of interesting that Git can do a whole bunch of things that you may not know about. Now, I called this talk So You Think You Know Git, but actually it's So You Think You Know Git Part 2. Did anybody see my FOSDEM version of this talk? Okay, so I didn't want to do the exact same talk. That was kind of my plan. You go and you give talks, and you don't, you can give talks multiple times, but my other talk kind of got a lot of views on YouTube, and so I didn't want to give the same talk again. So this is actually So You Think You Know Git Part 2, Git Revenge. It's exactly the same format as the other one, so if you like this talk, you can go on YouTube and watch another 45 minutes of this same exact type of thing, but I'm not covering any of the same topics. So it turns out that there's a lot of dumb shit that Git does, and I can talk for hours about it. So a little bit about me. I was one of the GitHub co-founders. I wrote the Pro Git book. If you read the, if you go to the Git website and read the book, that was my sort of open source book. And now we're working on a new Git client, which is also source code is available on GitHub, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I've been working in Git for a really long time, and I found it really interesting how many things it can do, and that you probably don't know. So there's more than 145 commands in Git. There was actually one introduced in the last release this week called Git Replay, which I'm not going to talk about today because it's a little bit boring. But there's just keep coming up with new commands. So there's a lot of them you probably don't know. There's still an average of 10 commits, 9 commits a day, every year. So there's always more stuff going into Git. But most of you probably learned 5 commands, and you use those same 5 commands, and you don't kind of go outside of that. Everybody's nodding. They're like, I do know those 5 commands. So there's 10,000 commits in the last 3 years. What has been happening, right? How much of this do you actually know? So I'm just going to give you a bunch of stuff that Git does today that you may not know about. I'm going to just do it as a shotgun buffet of here's a bunch of stuff that I'll talk about today. If you don't want to take notes, if anything you find is interesting, I put these slides up at the blog at GitButler, so you can go and find the slides and look up any of this stuff. So just try to see if there's anything that catches your attention, and then you can go look it up later, or we can talk about it over beers tonight. Okay, so I'm just going to hit them. One is there's some new commands in Git called switch and restore. Does anybody use switch or restore? Handful of people? Okay, so one of the things that's sort of problematic about Git that people have been complaining about for a long time is that checkout is very overloaded. So you can do a lot of stuff with checkout. So you can switch branches, checkout branch. You can revert a file, check out the file that'll revert it to whatever the version is in the index. You can revert a file to an older version of the file. If you say, here's an old commit, make the file look like it looked like in that commit instead of what it looks like now. You can also, I don't know if you know this, you can patch checkout files. So if you do checkout-p, it'll do this interactive thing, and it'll say, do you want to revert this hunk and this hunk and this hunk? You don't have to do the entire file, which is kind of cool. But again, it's checkout, and none of these things are really checking out anything, right? It's reverting stuff, it's switching stuff. So Git kind of put these new porcelain commands in that just wrap this. So instead of writing git checkout branch, you can say git switch branch, and it'll switch into that branch. And they've renamed some of the options to it, so you can say -c, which is essentially like git checkout -b. It's create a new branch and switch to it, right? I don't know what -c stands for. It could be create, it could be cat, who knows, right? Like the people who write Git have some interesting ideas from time to time, so it could stand for pretty much anything. But switch is one. The other is restore. So instead of saying git checkout file in order to restore the contents, you can say git restore file, and it does exactly the same thing, essentially. It's just, they're just trying to make it so it's a little bit easier for new users to say, don't learn these 5 things that checkout does, learn these ones that are a little bit more domain specific, and the options have changed to be a little bit more clear what they're doing. So if you want to restore from an older commit, you can say --source and then do it from that file, and that'll work too. And the -p and a couple of the other commands. But it just splits it up. So if you're teaching somebody Git today, you might want to teach them switch and restore rather than checkout and all of the different things that it does. Okay. If you want to remember what these are all the different things that you can do with restore, checkout, switch, and reset. Checkout and switch, you can switch branches. Restore and checkout, you can undo unstaged changes. Restore and reset, you can undo stage changes. Reset and switch, you can move the head reference. And all of them, you can actually accidentally delete shit in your working directory. So just if you need to remember that, this is a handy guide for you. The next thing I want to talk about is hooks. How many of you use hooks in your Git repositories? So there's lots of things you can do with hooks. I don't know if you know how many hooks there are. There are 28 hooks that you can use in Git. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I just want to talk about, actually, let's get rid of the email stuff. I assume most of you aren't sending email patches to mailing lists. Let's get rid of the Perforce bridge stuff. You probably don't care about that. Let's get rid of the server stuff. You're probably not running your own server, right? You're probably using GitHub or something. And Microsoft introduced a bunch of large repository scaling stuff that has some hooks in it that even they don't really use anymore. So what we're really looking at is these 11 hooks. So you can do stuff around your commits. You can do stuff around rewriting or like rebasing or merging. And you can do stuff around switching branches or pushing. But you probably don't want to go into .git/hooks and write your own scripts. You can do that. That's how that's how Git tries to use them. But there's better ways of using hooks that are much more interesting. So these are some examples of what you can do with hooks. You can help with commit message formatting. You can install packages after you change something. You can update C tags, right? And switch to tabs or spaces. You can lint stuff. You can make sure you're not committing large files. There's all sorts of stuff you can do with hooks. But there's two things that I've seen used that I think are really valuable now, which help with managing hooks. One is a package called pre-commit, and the other one's a package called Husky. Pre-commit, essentially, you install this program. You create a YAML file that says, here's the hooks that I want to do. So you're not putting the files in. You're saying, here's what hooks I want to run. And then you install this thing. And then every time that you commit after that, it'll run those. And the YAML file looks like this, which is kind of cool. So it's almost like a gem file or something. It points at a repository and says, this repository has a whole bunch of hooks that are defined in it, and these are the IDs of the hooks from that repository I want you to run when I'm doing stuff, and they can hook into any of these parts of your work cycle. So you can say, okay, these are sort of the standard ones and some of the hooks I want to run, and then I have this other one called black in there. And then when you commit, it has this nice output, and it says which ones ran and which ones passed and which ones skipped and stuff like that. And since the YAML file's in your repository, everyone on your team can share them and use them as well, which is much nicer than trying to pass hooks around to people and have them use it. And then the other one is Husky, which is very similar. It's an NPX thing, and you can keep your hooks in a .husky file, and anybody who runs that, it'll run those hooks. So mainly, this is valuable for sharing hooks with other people on your team and making sure that everybody's running the same linters or the same hooks when they're running stuff. The next one I want to talk about is attributes. How many of you have a .git attributes file in your repository? I'm getting less and less, fewer and fewer people doing these fun things with Git. So attributes is a way of telling Git certain things about file extensions in your repository. So I'll give you a real dumb example that I think at least shows you what it's capable of doing. If you do git diff and you have two images and Git sees it as a binary file, it won't show you the difference between the images, right? It can't really do that. It says it's binary. I can't do a diff on this like I can with a text file. So I just say, hey, they're different. But something you can do is you can run files through an intermediate and then diff that. So for example, you can use something called exif tool on an image. It'll give you some metadata about an image. And then you can say, if anything that ends in .png, use this exif diff tool, and what the exif diff tool is just run exif tool, right? And so what it'll do is it'll run it through that and then diff the output of that. So instead of saying A and B differ, it'll say here's a difference in the metadata of the files, right? Which is not the difference in the files exactly, but it's more useful than A and B differ. So it just gives you an idea of some stuff that you can do. And how this works is it runs things through called smudge and clean filters. And so what this does is if you have some files and you say everything in .txt, run it through a smudge, and then it will run it through this program and then put it in your working directory. And then if you say, you add or you commit, it'll run it through another filter before it puts it into your repository. So you can do this on all sorts of stuff. One dumb example would be to implement something like RCS keywords. There's something like half of this audience has never used anything other than Git. But if you're really old, like I am, and you've actually used tools like CVS or RCS, they used to have these things where you could put these little headers into your files, and then when you check out the files, it'll fill them out, and then when you commit them, it'll clean them back out again, right? So you can say, here's the version, or here's the last commit, or here's version history, or something like that. So when you check it out, it actually looks like this, but in the source code itself, if you look at it at GitHub, it doesn't have any of this data on it, right? So you can do something like this in Git if you wanted to. You could, write a file that expands the date, and then just say, hey, I have this filter called dater, and the smudge is to run it through this program. The clean is to run it through this Perl expression. And then if you put this string into a file, and you say, hey, for everything that ends in or all of my files, run it through this filter, and then you check it back out, it'll have expanded that out, right? So you could do this type of thing. It's a very simple example that none of you will probably want to do, but it gives you an idea of what you can do. The biggest usage of this is a program called LFS. So if you're using Git LFS, this is how Git LFS works, right? It works with this Git attribute stuff. Git LFS is large files, so if you're working in a gaming industry or you have large gaming assets or something like that, you don't want to put all of that into Git, because then when you clone, you get every version of every large file, and it's not very good at that. So what you do instead is essentially you store pointers in the repository, and then you have these smudge and clean filters that check them out and put them back in. So if you use Git LFS, and you install it, and you track something, what that does is it updates your Git attributes file. And then if you do something like commit a movie file or something like that, it doesn't actually store it in Git and push it to GitHub. It pushes it to whatever your LFS server is, which also can be GitHub, but in a different way. But the actual file that it stores is 3 lines, right? It's not the entire movie file. It's just sort of this pointer. And then when the smudge filter looks at it, it says, hey, okay, you have a smudge filter on this. Here's the SHA. I'll go out to some third-party server. I'll pull down the movie file, and I'll put it in your working directory as though that was what was stored in Git. So that's how LFS works. But again, you can do all sorts of stuff with these filters. Okay, I have no idea how much time I have because we started a little bit off. I have like 10 more minutes, right? I'll just pretend somebody in the back gave me a green light on that. So another fun thing is fix-up commits. So how many of you use a rebasing type workflow rather than a merging type workflow? Okay, so it's 50-50-ish. You guys are wrong, but that's fine. But if you do use a rebasing type workflow, there's a really cool thing you can do. So one of the things that I think GitHub kind of messed up is the way that we do pull requests. It's really difficult. You do your commits, you do a nice series, you say, okay, I've documented my 3 commits and stuff, and they're really nicely documented, and I push them to GitHub repository and open up a pull request, and now I get feedback. And if I get feedback, and it's feedback on the first commit of the 3, it's really difficult to fix it, right? To sort of amend that commit and add those, whatever the review is, into that commit. What you usually do is you say, hey, I fixed some review stuff, right? And you add a 4th commit on top, and you push it up, because you don't want to force push branch or something like that. But if you didn't want to do that, if you wanted to, say, clean up your series, put the review into the appropriate commits in your history that you had, and be able to fix that up, it's really difficult to do, because what you have to do is you have to sort of interactively rebase and say stop at each thing and pull in the new changes and commit it there, and blah, blah, blah. So Git actually has a really easy way of doing this that you probably don't know. I'm actually, sorry, I keep pulling I'm curious what audience, who uses fix-up and auto-squash? Nobody. 5 people. Okay. So what you can do if you wanted to do the workflow that I was talking about is, let's say that we have this patch series. We have some branch. It has like 5 commits on it. That's my nice series. I push it up somewhere. I get some review. Somebody says, hey, add this to the documentation, right? So I can say, OK, I'm going to add something to the documentation. I'm going to commit it. But instead of sort of rebasing and trying to figure out where to put it, I can say, commit this, but -- fix-up, and then I give it the SHA of the commit that I want it to be added to, right? So I want to fix up this commit with sort of whatever I've done in this last commit here. And then it's just -- fix-up. There's other things too you can do, like reword, and there's a couple of different things that you can do. But it's essentially adding to the commit history. And then what it does is, it's actually kind of simple. It does this, right? So it just creates a new commit that has a very specific commit message in it that gives Git information later. So it does keep adding to the history, but then you can say git rebase -- auto squash, and you used to have to do -I and do this interactively anyways, and it would sort of it would essentially do an interactive rebase, but move things around properly so that it would squash them properly. But right now, you actually don't need to do that. As of 6 months ago or something, you can say rebase -- auto squash, and it will just rebase it. And then if you run git log, you can see that all the SHAs changed, right? It actually did rebase your series, but it took you can do this with multiple. You can have 5 or 6 fix-up commits, and then auto squash everything, and it will do the rebase automatically. If it has problems or something, it'll stop, and you can fix it and rebase continue or something. But it's actually kind of a really nice workflow if you're trying to keep a patch series clean. The other thing, if you're doing a rebase workflow and you're trying to keep your series clean, you can use something called update refs. And the way that this works is if you rebase stacks of branches. So if you're doing stacked diffs, if you're using something like Fabricator or something like that, right, where you're trying to do stacked branch or stacked diff workflows, stacked branch and stacked diffs are essentially you're doing lots of different branches that are kind of on top of each other, right? And so the downside to this, I actually don't use this very much. I don't really love this. Most people do it because it's easier to review sort of on GitHub because it kind of splits up. Because GitHub, you can't really review commits. You can only really review branches. And so people like stacking branches to make them act like commits, right? Which is kind of funny. But if you're doing that and you have these things and you want to change something down at the bottom, the downside of this is if you merge in patch 1, you just get patch 1. If you merge in patch 3, you get all 3 of them, right? They're all dependent. So if you're doing merges or something, it's a little, but whatever. It doesn't really matter. If you're doing that and you want to rebase something that's at the bottom of this, it's a little bit of a pain in the ass because if you rebase this, what will happen is it's not going to move the references of the other commits, right? It will just move the reference of whatever the one you were on when you did the rebase. Even though it does rebase the whole series, it doesn't actually move the pointers of the other ones. So recently they introduced, so you can see these are exactly the same ones, but some of them are they're off. And so what you have to do then is manually move the pointers yourself, right? I see some people nodding. There's a handful of people that are, most of you are real bored right now about this. I can tell. There's like 3 guys that are like, oh my God. So that guy over there is going to love the other YouTube video too. So if you say -- update refs, what it will do is essentially what you assume it would do, right? Is it says, hey, I saw that there were some references on commits that I just rebased for you, and so I moved them for you, right? So you don't actually have to do that. And so if you do it, it just does what you assume it should do, and it moves the references for you, and it'll move a whole stack. You can also, if you do this, actually, whether you do this or not, it's not a bad thing to just globally add this configuration because honestly, it's probably a better default. But Git doesn't want to be backwards incompatible, so it tends not to. You have to add all of these sort of updates. Okay, just like 2 more things. Scaling Git. So if you have a huge repository, like hundreds of gigabytes, right, or hundreds of thousands or millions of files in your working directory. There's a whole bunch of work that Microsoft has done, almost exclusively Microsoft has done recently to try to scale Git to be able to do Windows development on Git, right? And all of this stuff has been upstreamed, and so it's all available in Git. And I talked about this in my other talk a bit. I'm not really going to go into it except to show you a command that ships with Git now. So if you install Git, you get 2 top-level commands. You get Git and then the 145 sub-commands that Git will run. And now you get a second one called scalar. And scalar is only used to clone, essentially, but to clone very, very large repositories. So if you go on your computer, I'm actually curious how many of you have this on your computer and don't know. Has anybody ever heard of the scalar binary? Not one person in this audience. But it makes sense, right? It's mostly used if you have massive repositories, but in my other talk, I talked about all of the things that it does. I'm not going to talk about any of that other than to say, if you clone with scalar, it will set up all of your defaults to deal with huge repositories. By default, that is, you don't have to set 5 other things. So if you're curious, you can, it's a Git command. You can go on Git SCM, like you can read about the thing. But essentially, all you have to do is say, instead of git clone, you say scalar clone, and it sets it up a little bit differently, but it sets up all this stuff. It sets up prefetching, it sets up commit graph generation, it sets up your file system monitor for fast statting, it sets up a partial cloning. You actually won't get all of the files checked out by default. You have to individually say, here's the 3 subdirectories that I want. and it does sparse checkout. So yeah, anyways, if you have a huge repository, checkout scaler, it could be an easier default for setting up large repositories. And then the last good thing that I'll talk about is work trees. How many of you use work trees? Okay. 5 people. So work trees, this is because of what I'll talk about next, which is what GitButler does. I get this type of thing a lot of, why aren't you talking about work trees? And partially it's because nobody really uses work trees, but they can be very, very valuable to some people. So work trees, essentially, it's to enable to let you to work on more than one branch at a time. So if you, for example, this is probably very common, you have a feature. Did I set off an alarm? Did I steal something? Okay, I'll wrap up if that's what that is. If you want to work on a feature, is this going to go on as long as I can do? I can be, okay. If you want to work, oh, Jesus. If you want to work on a feature and then somebody comes in and is like, hey, we need a bug fix, right? And then you're like, okay, well now I have to stash everything and kind of create a new branch and switch it and fix it and push it up and stuff like that. Work trees help you not need to do that because it allows you to provide a new working directory for each branch that you want to work on at the same time. And so the way that works is very simple. You have a couple branches. You say git work tree add, give it a branch name and a directory, and it will check out that branch into a new directory. And then you can go work on it in that directory. And the cool thing is if you commit in that work tree, and then you go back to your original one, and you say, what are my branches? It'll show you the branches that you're working on in other work trees, right? So it's a shared object database. You don't have to kind of move objects back and forth. Anything you do in any of them is visible in all of them. And you can push from them and things like that. Okay. And you can list out your work trees, and it says, here's all of the different work trees that you have. I don't actually think that, it says I have a minute left. I think that's somebody stealing something. Actually, everybody keep an eye out for somebody looking shifty and running around like this. So the last thing is, the other way to solve this is with the project that I'm working on, which is called GitButler, which kind of solves the same problem of working on multiple branches at the same time. Except instead of giving you a different working directory for each one, we allow you to do all of them in one working directory, and we just remember what hunks go in which virtual branches and let you commit to them. So it looks kind of like this, where you have a different lane per branch, and you can just kind of drag changes or files from one lane into another. And when you commit, it looks like essentially that's the only change that was in that branch, like you were on it by itself, right? So it's kind of nice in that all of this is in one working directory. So this is a branch. I can commit. You can see there's a commit thing in each lane individually, so I can commit and change and update and stuff, all of them individually, push. And when I push, I get a different branch on GitHub for each one of these, right? So it's kind of like stacked branches would be dependent. These are completely independent branches that live together. So it's almost like taking a merge product and then separating it out into branches, right? And the nice thing is, since they all live in one working directory, you know that all of these branches will merge cleanly because it has to, right? And so this is how we're working in the project that we're working on. And you can find it on GitHub as well if you're interested in the project. So that is pretty much it. If you thought that was interesting and want to hear 10 other things, random shit that Git does, you can go to our YouTube channel. There's a video from my FOSDEM version of this talk. Other than that, let's get a beer tonight. I would love to hear about your workflows, about your Git stuff. Thank you very much, and have a very, very great conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott, for the insights of Git. We'll certainly use them to my daily life. Up next, Phil Nash, who will be talking about CSS in between the pages. Let's see what he has to say. Roll the clips.
Hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure, an absolute joy to see you all here. It's an absolutely great conference, and it's I know it's second afternoon and we're after lunch, but I hope to excite you and entertain you a little bit with one of my favorite new features on the web, and I hope you come with me on this. My name's Phil Nash. I am a developer advocate at a company called Sonar. Sonar is a code quality solution. It helps you write clean code. We have a couple of products, SonarLint, which is a free editor for your free plugin for your editor that will help you find and fix bugs as you're writing code. And then SonarCube, Sonar Cloud will live in your pipeline to help to help stop those bugs going into production. If you've got any questions about Sonar at all, we have a little booth just over there somewhere. So come see us afterwards. Any questions about this talk, of course, come see us over there afterwards. So let's get on with this. Again, my name is Phil Nash. You can find me on the internet as Phil Nash everywhere. Let's carry on. I want to talk today about the Vue Transitions API. It is absolutely my favorite new thing on the web, and I'm going to tell you why over the next 20, 25 minutes. It's a bit of a story about single-page application transitions, as well as multi-page application transitions. It's going to help us building our single-page apps, our React, our Vue, our Angular, but it also helps if we are just generating multi-page applications, and that's what I'm excited about. And I'll tell you how it works. I've got a little example here just to start with. I'm going to throw code straight up onto this. If you had a bit of HTML that looks like this, where we've got like an image and a little caption under that image and a bit of JavaScript to say we're going to play this transition, and then in the JavaScript we'll grab the element by its ID, and then this is a real simple thing. We just switch in some HTML. We grab the filters array from the element, and then when you've got that filters, you move the new HTML in, and then you play the filter, and then a little bit of CSS that looks like this. It's a bit long, it's a bit complicated, using the old DX image transform from Microsoft, thank you very much. And it ends up looking like this. You get a like blinds transition, which is kind of cool. Yeah, no, I had to download Internet Explorer 8 and Windows XP in order to do this demo, because it turns out that, yes, Internet Explorer invented this back quite a long time ago. It works for multi-page applications too. It's a meta tag. You get a choice of transitions. In this case, this was transition 12 you could do. So yes, Internet Explorer actually invented this, and we never picked it up. It was a real shame. But thank you, Internet Explorer. Thank you for the web. You gave us all that, and then you stopped working on it. So we have better news, because we have a new Vue Transitions API that actually matters. And it doesn't have any Microsoft inside the CSS properties, which is exciting. So the Vue Transitions API, I want to take a step back and why do we want to build something like this? Why do we need an API for Vue Transitions? Because we are building applications that have a lot of interactivity and a lot of things that users love, and part of that is moving from state to state. And what we're really trying to avoid, particularly in the case of a multi-page application, is that flash of white, that blank page that we get between two states. The entire thing is about state. We've been speaking for years and inventing libraries and everything to manage state in our front end. But when you have two different HTML pages, that state is completely thrown away, flash of white, and the new thing that arrives next up. It's also a little bit challenging to do a transition, a nicely animated transition between two states, even in a single-page application, because you go from that stage of having one state and then made of data, and then you change that data in the state, and the application, the UI, has to kind of update to that, and it kind of needs to know about both states at the same time, and that's been kind of traditionally difficult. I looked into this in Angular recently, and up until recently, Angular had basically reinvented CSS in JavaScript, but not as a CSS and JavaScript framework. They reinvented CSS and JavaScript just to do page transitions between things. And it just made me sad kind of reading all this definite CSS that was just JavaScript, just to make this happen. And so I want to show you what this actually looks like and how it is actually implemented with a quick demo. I have a genuinely terrible website. But it is as simple as possible, simple as it can be. It has 2 pages. This looks like it has 3 links, but they all go to the same thing. And actually, it really is just replacing HTML on the page. It flips back and forth between the 2 things. Not that much fun. Not a white flash, admittedly. This is a single-page application. It uses inner HTML all over the place. What it's doing is taking some old content and then putting some new content in the inner HTML and then swapping it out. But we can update this to make it a nicer swap. It doesn't have to be so jarring, so quick like that. We can take it, because we have this update the document function, and instead of just straight calling it, we can use this new API, and we can call on document.start Vue transition, and then in there, we'll give it a function that is going to change the UI. Now, this function can be as complicated as you need it to be, but in this case, it really is just changing inner HTML contents. When we do that, I'll refresh that page. I've gone off the internet, so the images are going to go away, but that doesn't matter, because we're going to see, just by changing that one line, we now get a crossfade. We haven't given it any style. This is the default kind of result of calling start transition, calling start view transition, and we get a crossfade like that. I think that's quite nice. That's a good start. I love a nice default like that. And so that's it again. Document.start transition, start view transition, and then you pass it the function that is going to change the document. Now you can do this, in your massive single-page application. You can do it with a 3-line function that changes inner HTML. And what it's actually doing behind the scenes is quite interesting. What it's doing is creating a bunch of layers. It takes a snapshot of the page at the start of calling start view transition, and it makes that basically an image on the page. And that image you can address in CSS as the view transition old root, and the root being the whole page. It then performs the state update, the change, what the page is going to look like, and takes another snapshot, and then we'll animate between them. And that default animation is that crossfade. But we have control of this because these are CSS pseudo elements that we can actually use to animate themselves. And so the whole thing becomes this kind of layery thing. I built this slide deck in HTML as well, so I wanted to be like, I can do Z index. We get this layer of like a surrounding thing, and then we get this group of things, and then there's sort of like an extra group of them, and then each of the snapshots. And it's important to know that the old one actually sits on top of the new one. So it is in that order, old and then new. Because if you want to go the other way, it has to be changed around. And so we can use that CSS to change that. So if I go into my CSS for this, I didn't want to live code this because no one wants to see anybody live code a cubic Bezier function. I'm glad you agree. But if I uncomment that, then I'm making a view transition here that's going to animate the old state up and out and fade away, and the new state fade in and up. It's a nice little thing. I'm going to save that, and we'll see that in action right now. And what you're going to see is that I've broken it. Because the whole page now flashes. The header, the footer are doing this. It's not what we want to see. So we have this power, and now we've abused it and made things worse. Sorry about that. So if I go back to the CSS, it turns out that we can actually create other layers as part of this. So with that default version, we get a layer out of the whole page. But we can create other layers by naming them. And in this case, if I name the header and the footer, header and footer, doesn't matter what you name them. If we do that, they get their own layer. They're going to do the animation independently now. But because the header and the footer are at the top and the bottom of the screen, they don't move anywhere, they don't actually have to animate between each other. Oh, sorry, no, that's not right. They're not doing the animation because this CSS is for the root object, and these are now header and footer objects. And so I've saved that, and if I change it now, and again, apologies for the images, but now the header and the footer don't get animated. We've isolated them from the rest of the page, and just the content, just the rest of the page is going to do this nice upwards and inwards transition. I like that. So that's what happens when you name a thing. We started with just this view transition group here, with the image pair of the old and the new full page, and then we isolate anything we name. We had a view transition group for the header, and that has an image pair, what it looked like before and what it looked like afterwards. And we can animate that independently now, which is kind of nice. In fact, actually, because it's the default, it is doing a crossfade, but because it's crossfading to itself, you can't see that. It's important to note that this is actually quite debuggable as well. This is just CSS animations, and so all of the existing browser tooling for CSS animations exists. So if you pop open, I'm in Chrome here, if you pop open the Animations tab in DevTools, then you can capture that animation. And you can play around with it. You can slow it down. I quite like that. Let's do it in 10%. And if we do capture it, we can also pause it halfway through and then let's do that one more time. We can capture that, and then we can actually debug the entire transition ourselves using the animation timeline. I don't have time to go into how the dev tools for animations work, but they're really cool. And we can see each of those individual transitions happening and control them in order to debug them. So I like that. And then there's some other interesting and important things you need to know about this. First up, you can do like entrance and exit animations. If you have an element that is not previously on the page and then entering the page, we can provide an entry animation for it using only child on the new transition. And we can, if an element is exiting the page, we can do a exit animation using the view transition old and only child. I think it's cool. I don't have a demo for that though. And other important things are accessibility, of course. If you are as you should be when you're making animations, you should be cognitive of users who cannot deal with things flying about, moving around the page. And so, like, turning them off. This is the easiest thing you can do. The media query prefers reduced motion. Will tell you if a user does prefer reduced motion. And if they do, the easiest thing you can do is turn it off. But reduced motion doesn't necessarily mean no motion. It just means less of it. Make it snappier. Don't make things fly around too much. But it's important to remember that and to turn it off when a user requires that. I could go deeper into this, but we don't have that much time today. And Jake Archibald's article on this on the Chrome developer docs is that it goes into a whole bunch of detail about how to deal with this. So I fully recommend reading through this article. It is great. It will even give you pointers for how this works in your favorite framework as well. Browser support, of course, remains only Chromium things. So that, of course, means Chrome and Edge and Opera. Remember Opera? But that, is 2/3 of the internet these days. So I think this is a really nice progressive progressive enhancement. And you can progressively enhance this. If the document start view transition function exists, then we can use it. And if it doesn't, you get the old transitionless moves. Or you use whatever code you were using before to do a transition. Progressive enhancement is also one of my favorite things about the web platform, always has been. We invent new things, and eventually the browsers can catch up to us. So that's a bit of a change. I like single-page application transitions like that, but my real favorite thing is multi-page application transitions for this, because this is something we could not have done before. Multi-page application transitions are experimental. There's a little warning here. This still is not live in browsers today, but doesn't stop us from experimenting with it. And the way to do so is flip on the flag. View transition API for navigations. It's on there in Chrome's flags. And highly worth doing so because you can find all the other web developers who've done so when you visit their blog and things fly around when you change pages. It's great. Multi-page application transitions start even simpler. We don't need a function, we don't need anything. Much like in the Internet Explorer days, we just need a meta tag. In this case, the meta tag is view transition, the content is same origin. Same origin is all we can do right now, although there is investigations into whether cross-origin transitions can be achieved. And when you do that, let's go to my multi-page demo. It's the same site. It just has more than one page. If you can see the URL bar, that is changing between 1 and 2. And if you add the meta tag view transition same origin, what you would get is that crossfade animation. But this is the same site, so I've already done the rest of the CSS to change the animations. And in my multi-page application now, it looks the same. That is changing pages. That is doing a full navigation, yet it acts and appears the exact same as the single-page application version that we saw earlier. I think that's so cool. That's all I get to tell you about multi-page applications. It's a meta tag, and the rest is all what we just discussed. It's very cool. It's all in the CSS. And so that kind of brings me to like a bit of a question about the future of web development. You see, we've spent a lot of time We've even spent, there's been an entire sister conference to this across town about Vue in the last couple of days. And we spent a lot of time building frameworks to make it easier for us to, I genuinely think, to miss out on that white flash of a page between things so that we can maintain state over multiple different parts of an application. And that's fine. But so many applications don't need an enormous framework in order to deal with that. Some applications could be multi-page applications with a sprinkling of other JavaScript, but for the user experience, for the transition, for the way to get between it without flashing white to people, we implement React, we implement Vue, and it's a bad idea. Or in my opinion, it's a bad idea. There is a spectrum between website with only HTML and CSS and full-blown web application that requires everything we can throw at it from JavaScript. And I think that Vue transitions like this, the multi-page application version of it, can move the area on that spectrum from where we used to implement a framework a little bit further towards the full experience that a full application requires. And I think that's exciting. It means that those sites that we can drop frameworks from and just use them for transitions will be faster, will be more performant, will be less taxing on a user's browser, on a user's mobile device. And that's exciting to me. And I hope you kind of agree with that. I made the point about websites and web applications. Yeah, we need to make a decision when we come up with something like this, whether we need this much technology or this much technology. And I think this helps with that. And we can build those exciting transitions. We can actually have quite a lot of fun with this as well. Now, I don't think anybody really needs blinds as a transition, but we can implement it. And so I did. I've done a bunch of these. I've got a little project going called Unnecessary Vue Transitions, and it has a bunch of examples of ways we could do a transition. This is running locally for me right now, but this is online. I'll tweet out the link later. And so we can do blinds using CSS purely. And it's not that much CSS even. It's quite incredible. When I was preparing this talk and working on this, it turned out I learned a lot more about animations in CSS than I ever knew before, than I actually learned about the Vue Transition API itself, including things like, I think this is part of Houdini, using the property to define what a CSS custom property does, and its sort of values, so that you can animate over it. And yeah, if you use then mask image from CSS as well, with a repeating linear gradient, we can absolutely build ourselves a blind transition. And then there's others. Let's go back. So I had a bit of fun with this. You know, you can slide things from the left. You can slide things in from the right. Up. I did that on the slides earlier. Obviously, we can do down. Oh, over. That was quite nice. But my favorites became blind, and then using other masking things, we could do a nice screen wipe. I quite like that. Super simple again. It's this much CSS. Again, I'll share the link so you can actually go and see these later. The spiral wipe. Yeah. We can turn our websites into bad 80s television shows. Oh my God, I'm excited about that. And then what did a little circle in. That's cool. Again, mask image is one of the most powerful bits of CSS we have. It's absolutely unreal. Oh, this is clip path, actually. Sorry. Mask image is cool. This is clip path. Also very cool. And the last one, scale in. That was so boring. Let's go back to spiral. Woo! And so there's so much fun we can have with this, but we can also make the experience better via it as well. And so all I'm kind of asking for you is, you know, with these things at our fingertips, and these multi-page transitions will come at some point. I'm certain of it. We can make the right choices about the technologies we use to build our sites with. If all you are doing a framework for is to make the experience like smoother, transitions are going to help us do that anyway. I'm not going to finish there. Yes, no, I am. Yeah, make those right choices. Build smooth animations, build great user experiences, and use the power of progressive enhancement and the platform that we have today to do this. Again, my name is Fanash. I'm a developer advocate at Sona. I'd love to come and chat. I'd love to chat with you over at the booth there if you do have any more questions. I will share these slides out and the link to unnecessary Vue transitions so that you can all have a play with them. Come up with your own. It's open source. Please submit your own. And otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of DevWorld, and thank you very much.
We would like to take a moment to give a special thank you to our partners. Without our partners, we couldn't have not organized this event. Our partners have also offered amazing things throughout the conference, whether it be at their exhibitor booth, whether it to be contributing via talks, or making offers to you as an attendee for you to enjoy their products. I would like to give a special thank you to all of them, so please do not tune out, because without them this could have not been possible, and without them we cannot organize these conferences online as well as in person. So here it comes. First up, I want to thank DataStax. Thank you so much for participating in DevWorld Conference 2024. ABN AMRO, CK Editor, Brintum, Neo4j, Cadena, ING Bank, ScyllaDB, Adevinta, Temporal, SonarSource, Booking.com, Twilio, Aerospike, Shopware, Neurwell, Sentry, TomTom, Postman, the Dutch government, Picnic, Surbos, Couchbase, Sue, Henge, Cloudinary, Elastic, GitButler, Daytona, ViewMastery, Mailtrap, Knapbank, Permit.io, Echoes, KLM Airlines, ViewSchool, Storyblock, UbiCloud, Gina.ai, Roost.ai, Meticulous.ai, a lot of AIs, LeafCloud, and the support of really great causes like Hack Your Future and Code Your Future. Big thank you to the organization who's behind all of this, the mother company called Passionate People. Passionate People is a software consultancy specializing in JavaScript consultancy, so please go check them out at passionatepeople.io. We hope you enjoyed the conference, and thank you very much for watching.
What an inspiring talk, Phil. Thank you so much for your insightful information. Next up, we have Bakhtar from ABN AMRO. He'll be talking about enhance and improve your user experience with BFF. Let's see what he has to say.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible? Let's test. Raise your hand if you're a backend developer. Raise your hand if you're a front-end developer. Raise your hand if you're not a developer. So you're a PO, manager. I see some people who didn't raise their hand, so maybe you should check your headsets. But, well, this talk has been categorized as front-end. It can be beneficial for backend, but also for not developers, for POs, for managers. Today, we are going to build an app together. And while building this app, we will see how backend for frontend is going to help us to create a better app. A better app in terms of security, in terms of longevity, in terms of user performance, but also in terms of the process of which we are creating the app. I will also share my personal experience and learnings based on several projects where we applied this design pattern. Who am I? I'm Bakhtar Sobat. I'm working at ABN AMRO as an Android developer for almost 7 years now. But before joining ABN AMRO, I was working in other companies as a backend developer. Enough about me. Let's focus on our app. As the name suggests, it will be an e-commerce app. So our users will be able to browse, search products, and they will add the product in their shopping list or basket, and they will buy it, just like Amazon. Luckily for us, we already have some backends, let's say microservices, and they are independently deployable, they're loosely coupled. So our goal is for today to connect to these backends somehow and make use of them. let's take a brief look at these services. The product service delivers information about the product, such as title, subtitle, descriptions, images. The list can be really long, especially if you're dealing with electronics. But luckily for us, it doesn't have the price and the stock information, so they're more or less static, and we can cache them. The price and the stock information is part of the offer service. So each product can have one or more offers. And this service is not cacheable because it is dynamic. And the last one is a checkout service, which calculates the amounts based on the items that we have in our basket. So it's time for our first user story for today. As you can see, we are building the basket page. In this basket page, we have a list of items that we have added, and there is an amount. So let's see, where do we get all this data from? First, obviously, we need to retrieve the data from our checkout service. Once we have the offer IDs, then we can go to the offer service. And then, sequentially, we can go to our product service to gather information. As you can see, our app is now responsible for making all these sequential calls or parallel calls, it doesn't matter. Our app is responsible for mapping to our domain model. And because we are only interested in a small subset of the data, there will be a huge waste of resources. Let's focus now how BFF is going to help us. But what is BFF? It is an API gateway pattern, but it is a tailored API, which targets each client. But the most important property of BFF is it is a user-facing application component. If we have our services, S1, S2, S3, etc., and we have a BFF in front of that, then the combination of our app, our client, and the BFF should be considered as one or user-facing application. They are entangled with each other. As a matter of fact, BFF delivers domain objects to our app. And BFF is also output-driven or UI-driven. If you compare with traditional backends are input-driven. We have certain information, and we want to provide it in a more generic way. We are agnostic who is going to use it. So it is one size fits all. But we have these days, especially with mobile phones and stuff like that, we have different clients with different requirements. So that's why we need BFF to meet specific requirements of each client. One of the main or a special client is a native app. But unfortunately, till this day, 2024, people are considering native app as a website or as a web app. But that's not true. A native app is running outside your control on a user device. So if you're claiming that you have, that you're practicing DevOps, well, you have less freedom. If something happens, you just cannot roll back. You have to deal with the policies from the App Store and Play Store, and also user settings. And what about security? Well, everyone can download your app and reverse engineer it. Yesterday, there was a workshop about how to reverse engineer an iOS app. So we need BFF, especially for native app, to bring our logic from the front end to the back end, where we have much more control, and simplify our app, just the presentation. This was our initial solution direction, let's say. But now with BFF, BFF is responsible for aggregating the data and simplifying to the output that we exactly want to show. This is our domain model. But remember, if you have a website, you need to have another BFF. You cannot just reuse it. It's anti-pattern. And you cannot, even if they are looking the same from data perspective, they have different user experience. You might think, what am I going to do with the data that I'm sharing? Am I going to copy and paste it? No, you can create a generic layer or aggregation layer, which is responsible in our case for aggregating the data, and dedicated BFFs will be responsible for optimizing it for each client. The BFFs in the generic layer are illustrated as separate services, but that doesn't have to be. It depends on your architecture. It depends on how much money you have and how much love you have for your users. They can live in the same server as long as from code-wise they are in different modules. So later on, if you have enough money, you can put it on a different server. Let's take a look at some other benefits. First of all, we have already seen removing unnecessary data, right? Optimizing, but also from security perspective. If you remember, our checkout service is returning a credit card. Just as an example, it can be an email address or whatever, some sensitive data. The best place to have the logic to mask this data is BFF and not your client. You can do that in client, but the things that you can do in a client, you don't have to do it. Think about that. If your device is tampered, everyone can read the sensitive data that you want to hide. The power of API is to combine different APIs, merge them, and enriching your data with open source APIs, with open APIs or internal APIs. So if you, for example, want to show cross-selling products and there is an external API which is responsible for that, you can easily do it with BFF instead of doing it in the app. Just like front-end developers, also back-end developers and service developers, let's say, they are continuously busy to release a new version of the app. With BFF as a transparent layer in between, it will make your life much easier, much less painful, let's say. In our example, our product service team, they decide to remove images from their payload because they say, OK, now images are dark mode and light mode dependent. So there will be another service, image service, and it will return the images based on your light mode and dark mode settings. With BFF, and this is also what we did in one of our projects, with BFF, we let our backend developers to work on their services. When it is ready, you can point to the new services. And you only have to do the mapping in BFF without touching a single line of code in your client. You can also decide, OK, for now, I will forward just 10% of the requests to the services, to the new services, and I will monitor and see how they are performing. And for example, if it is weekend, you don't want to sacrifice your weekend, you go back to the old and gold implementation. It's Monday, you come back, and you gradually increase the percentages. You keep monitoring. And once you are confident enough, then you can remove the old services and implementation, and you point to the new one. Now, let's imagine without BFF. Here, somehow, we managed to point to the new services. It is weekend. But the image service is crashing. Out of memory, let's say, whatever is it, but it's crashing. It's weekend, right? But who's responsible? Is that front-end? Well, we can create a hotfix. How easy it is to deliver it. As you remember, it is a native app. Is it image service? Yeah, of course, but how long will it take for them to solve it? With BFF, you have a resilient layer in between, so you can, instead of propagating the error, you can replace the image, for example, with a no image or default image. So this way, you have much more resilience towards backend errors. And also, it allows you to have less emergency releases and less force updates. Because our backend for front-end developers are focusing on the logic, and it allows us as a front-end developers to focus on things that we are good at, namely UI, presentation layer. And also, we can share the logic between platforms, Android and iOS. The time to market is much shorter. It's fast. A native app, let me check the time. A native app should feel as a native. If you navigate from one screen to another screen, it should not be like every time you see a loading screen. It should be smooth and fast. With BFF, and that's our requirement, we can focus on that, we can achieve it. Imagine, without BFF, we were responsible for making all these calls, sequential calls, let's say. But remember that these calls are being done using the mobile network, which is not fast, which is not reliable. And you are not always sitting beside your Wi-Fi. You're walking, you're sitting in the bus. Well, I hope if you're walking, you're not using your phone. Enjoy the nature, I would say. But in case you're sitting in the train, and by the way, I'm really concerned about the provision. Let's see what it does bring upon us. But if you're sitting in a park and you want to buy something, the mobile network is not that reliable. With BFF, you will let aggregate this data from BFF, and the BFF to other services. The connection is fast. It is server to server. And you can even decide to cache products, if it's possible, and share the cache among other users. But remember, there is no perfect solution. This is also what we have learned during our projects. And then let's focus on our second user story. And this user story, we are creating our overview screen. This overview screen has two sections. One is to show the amount of the basket, and the other one is the deals. The response time for a basket is 2 seconds, and the response time for deals is 10 milliseconds. Let's go back. There you go. So in the first scenario, we ask BFF, hey, gather all the information and return it to me. So BFF is responsible for the deals. BFF is responsible for the amounts. But our user is now blocked for 2 seconds, and it's a landing page. What if we decide to make those parallel calls from our app through BFF, and now now the response will be only in 10 milliseconds. So here I've chosen a really extreme number, but it depends all on your case, on the context. If it is a landing page, you want to have a fast experience, user experience. But if it is in the checkout phase or in a phase where the user has already made a decision, it's OK to be slow. And just like everything else in this life, balance is more important than having a perfect solution. I've already mentioned that BFF is UI-driven. This also means, and it's also highly recommended, to have backend for front-end developers and your front-end teams. They should share the same product owner, and they should share the same backlog. And we should also involve all of our developers on the early stages of software development. At ABN AMRO, we are following the double diamond design process, if you're familiar with that. In short, it has two diamonds, 2 phases. In the first phase, the goal is to identify the problem. That is usually done by our UXers, business developers. They are interviewing the customers. They are observing their usages. And then once the problem is identified, then in the second phase, or the second diamond, all of us, we get together, and we are thinking about the solution. As many ideas as possible, not the best idea, but as many ideas as possible, crazy ideas. So even backend for front-end developers, everyone is involved. Once you have the solution based on certain criteria, you choose one. We do some usability test, prototype testing. It's time for our designer to create beautiful designs. And we use that design during our refinement session, together with backend for front-end developers. And then backend for front-end developers and front-end developers, we sit together and agreeing on the contracts. What is the parameters that you expect from me, and what is the response time, the response codes and response body. With those contracts, we create mock data, and then we start working in parallel. After integration, it's time for testing, deploying, and finishing the user story. But also remember, your process needs to be, let's say, agile, or have some room for improvisation. Imagine that during the ideation sessions, you come up with an idea, which, well, you love it, but you're not sure whether it's being used by our users in the real world or not. You did your homework, you did usability test, prototype testing, but still you're not sure. And instead of creating a pixel perfect in terms of design, but also in terms of architecture, a solution, and it turns out that your user is not going to use it, so you have wasted months of work, 3 months, 4 months. What we do, under proof of concept, we focus only on one platform, under isolated environment, let's say separate module, we take shortcuts. We implement it, let's say quick and dirty. We make some mock data, and we try to bring out our feature as fast as possible to the user and start measuring. And based on the outcome, you can decide whether to go ahead with it or not. In either cases, you have to delete the proof of concept. And I see still some apps, they have proof of concept in their production forever, which is not actually the goal of proof of concept. So this is actually something like this, which I love this video. They want to test if their product is working. Once they are sure that it's working well, they can then automate it. As we have said, the challenges that we have met during this process. We are advocating to have backend for front-end developers in each team. But if there are not enough backend developers, you can allow front-end developers to pick up backend tasks. What we have seen is it's really motivating for our front-end developers. They can work on their T-shapedness instead of O-shapedness. And they can also claim the full stack title on their LinkedIn. Of course, under supervision of backend developers. And the backend developers will also be responsible for setting up the environment and everything. Every time there is someone who says, well, I have GraphQL, I will use that one. GraphQL, if you are familiar with that, is an amazing tool. But remember, it brings a lot of complexity in your backend development systems. It will bring some performance issues, especially if you have nested queries. And caching is also difficult. They are working on that, I have read in the new versions. But it can get really complex, especially if you have nested queries. So those queries will end up in our front end. I would say, if you have already a backend for front end, or if you have already a GraphQL, you can combine these two worlds and make advantages of both of them. So, takeaways for today. We have different clients, and each client has its own unique requirement. And for that reason, we need BFFs. It's a tailored API that targets each of these clients and provide an optimized output for them. It is a user-facing application component, and most importantly, they are also output-driven or UI-driven. OK, so that was it. If you have questions, let's talk about it. If you want to discuss, if you are dealing with some toxic environment and the manager is not working, let's talk about it. I have some tips for you. But nevertheless, have a nice evening, or today and tomorrow. And happy to see you all here.
Thank you so much, Bakhtar, for the superior presentation. It was absolutely amazing. Up next, last but certainly not least, we have Jonas, who will be talking about 5 anti-patterns that cause our app to run slow. So let's hear what they got to say.
Hey, JSworld. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to speak at this year's conference. I was quite amazed to hear that I was voted top speaker of my track. So thank you all for that great feedback and the incredible time we had together in Amsterdam.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Jonas. I'm a freelancer from Germany. As a freelancer, I obviously work in a lot of different projects and see a lot of things that work quite well, but also some things that don't work that well. This is also why some people hire me to fix those things. And some of the things that didn't work well, I put in this talk so that you don't make the same mistakes as some other people did, or also that my teams did. But just to make it clear, so it's not that the team was bad or something, it's just some issues that happened. It's totally fine to do them. It's just better if you know how to fix them. Yeah, but this was the situation when I came in this project. So we had loading spinners that never seemed to stop, and the stakeholders were obviously not happy. And from that results this talk about 5 anti-patterns that slowed down our React GraphQL app, and the most important part, I guess, how we fix them. So the first anti-pattern is about overfetching. So basically asking for too much data, which makes your app slow because you don't really need that data at all. You don't show them. And especially in the case of GraphQL, where you can describe what fields you want to get back from a query, it's just unnecessary to have overfetching at all, because you just have to remove run field from your query, and then you're good to go again. It's not the same as in REST, where the backend devs have to remove that field again and everything. So this is an advantage of GraphQL, and we should actually use it and not do overfetching at all. But to show you how this could look like, the overfetching, I have one example about getting assignable users of the Apollo GraphQL client repository. And all the examples that I show in this presentation are from the GitHub API. They have a GraphQL API where you can play around with a bit. So you can get back like your issues, repositories, the users, and whatsoever. But this is just as an example. But in this case, we want to get back all the assignable users of this repository. And for that, we want to afterwards display their name and their bio in our app, so just render above it. And as you can see in the query itself, we are asking for data that is actually more than just the bio and the name. And we could just remove this information because we don't want to render it anyway. So this is how the query could look like when you stripped it down, just to have like the bio HTML and the name and also the ID, because I mean that's useful in React to render it. But if we now compare these two queries, there's actually a big difference in size and also in time, how long it takes to get back this query. So just by these small changes, we decreased the size by 31% and the time by 22%. But in this case, we have to keep in mind the query was really small. So it was only like 700 or 500 milliseconds, something like that. So 22% is not really noticeable to a user. But in your normal applications, you ask for more data. And because of that, the queries take longer than just under 1 second. So if you then improve it, it's actually noticeable to the user. So it's always good to do that. So to summarize it, ask for only the data that you need, and also update the queries if you do not use a field in your app anymore. Even though it doesn't make sometimes in small application big sense to do that because you don't really notice it, but in the long run, the application gets slower and slower because after a while you're asking for data that you don't need, you forget to remove that field again and again, and in the end the application is just really slow because you forgot to do that all the time. So it's just good practice to always remove the fields that you don't display in your application. You probably ask yourself, why does it even happen? Because I mean, it seems quite simple, right? You just check, okay, I'm not using this field anymore, just remove it, easy. But sometimes you just forget about it. That's the easy explanation for that. But there's actually another anti-pattern that makes it more difficult to really spot this anti-pattern. And this anti-pattern, which makes it difficult to spot the overfetching anti-pattern, is a misuse of fragments. In this case, again, we're using the GraphQL API, the GitHub API. We want to get all the issue authors, and we get a problem from GitHub. Okay, they complain we should use an inline fragment for this query. So we update that. We use an inline fragment to get back the author of this issue. And then we have another query where we want to list all the maintainers. And if we compare these queries, we are both asking for a user, and the data we want to get back is the same, basically, the bio HTML and the name. So we think, yeah, okay, it doesn't make sense to really repeat ourselves, so I think we could refactor that. So we're going to do that. We refactor that in a real fragment because we already use an inline fragment, so it's very similar anyway. So we refactor this fragment, and then we are using that in both of the queries. The fragment we just put in our big fragments.graphql file where we store all our fragments. Think to ourselves, yeah, good job. We refactored that. We are not using the same values again and again. The reviewer will be quite happy, and this is how it goes. We create an MR, the MR gets through, and the next step is working on the same information and needs to display more infos about the issue author. So the person opens the fragment file again, adds some more fields, use the fields in the front end, and then makes a PR, and it gets through again. This happens again, and the fragment gets larger and larger, and after a while, we get a big problem of overfetching again, because there are some fields in the fragment that are used by one query, and some fields are used by another query. And there are fields that are only used in one query and not in both. So we're doing overfetching again. So this is bad. So the solution for that is, first of all, be careful when you're using fragments. Don't do it as we did, create a bloated fragments.graphql file or just one directory where you store all your fragments, because then when you update your query, you totally forget about the fragments or you forget to update the queries itself. So in my opinion, it's better to have the fragments live nearer the queries itself, so that when you update a query or a fragment, that you update each other and don't forget about something and don't have the problem of overfetching again. And then again, when you update a fragment, make sure that you check what queries are actually using that fragment and are they still using the same fields. If this is not the case, you could put it in another fragment if you really want to do it, or you can just put it in the query itself. And it's also okay to repeat yourself, because in this case, if you repeat yourself, you have the opportunity to not do the overfetching. So in my opinion, this is better than having 2 times the same field in 2 different queries. Then the next anti-pattern is underfetching, so not asking for enough data, so you have to do additional queries again. It can be 1 second query, it can be 100 more queries, it can also be 1,000 queries. First of all, why is this even bad? I mean, first of all, you have an overhead for each request. And if you have more and more queries, this overhead sums up and it just gets larger than having just 1 query. In addition to that, the response compression will also work better for a single request case. And when you have multiple queries and you do the query in each of the components, you would have a loading state in each of the components. And again, then you would show several loading spinners on the page. This is kind of confusing for the user anyway, so 1 loading spinner might be a bit easier to understand. And moreover, when you have multiple queries, it's a bit difficult to use the filtering, sorting, and pagination that you get from your server from GraphQL. So how could this issue come up? So we have one goal. We want to get all the issues from the Apollo client repository, which are already assigned to someone. So someone is working on it or is going to be working on it. And this is how we would have done it before. So we would have one query where we get the first 100 issues. And then we also, in this query, get all the assignees. And afterwards, we have a filter method just in JavaScript where we want to filter, check, does this issue really have an assignee? If not, we don't want to show it anymore. Then we map over the IDs that actually have an assignee. We use this ID, pass it in a component, have another query that fetches all the data again for this issue. And then we render the issue. So as you might have guessed, we have one query. First, we get 100 issues. Then we filter over them. If we are lucky, we just have 80 issues left, 80 IDs left, where we'll do another 80 queries. So we have 81 queries. I mean, this is really bad, but it can get even worse, because if you don't just say, I want to get the first 100 results, if you don't paginate at all, you just get like the first 1,000 results. So in the worst case, you have 800, 900 requests at once, which is not so good. But how could we improve that? Actually not too difficult, because you have the possibility in GraphQL to add a filter. So in line 3, you see a filter by statement. Filter by is an assignee, and there's like this star. And the star means we want to get all the issues that have an assignee that is not null. This is what the star means. So now we have this filtered, and what we then do is we just map over these issues and render each of the issues. That's it. We just have one query instead of 80 or 1,000 or how many more. And the good thing as well is, first of all, we improved the performance by a bit, but we also simplified our code, because now we just added one more line in line 3. But we could remove, first of all, the filter statement. OK, this is not so difficult. I mean, we could leave that in there. But what is even better that we removed is, in the other component, we had another query. And we had to define a GraphQL for that. We have to define a hook, maybe a loading state, whatsoever. So we could remove 10 to 20 lines of complexity, which is quite good by also having this performance improvements. So the solution for underfetching, you should use filters, sorting, pagination on the server. So I mean, how you could even improve that more is you can use pagination, say, OK, I only want to get like the first 20 results. And then when the user scrolls down, I fetch the next 20 results, and so on. This is how you could also improve the performance by just using this filters, pagination, and sorting on the server. Now to the next anti-pattern, which is not using return values of mutations. For that, this is how we would have done it in our application beforehand, and then I show you how we could optimize it. So the first thing was in our application, the user types in some data in a form, clicks on the submit button. The client then sends a request to the server with the data that should be updated. The server handles the data. Server tells the client that the request was successful, and the client tells the user that the update was successful. The client asks the server for the updated data. The server looks for the updated data. Server sends back the updated data, and then the client shows the updated data. So this is what we were doing. As you can see, we have 2 requests and 2 responses. So there's one concept in GraphQL is return values of a mutation. So if you have a mutation like this one, this mutation just adds a star to a repository, and then we want to get something back. And the syntax is actually the same as in the query. You just say, OK, I want to get back the Stargazer count, which basically is how many stars does the repository have. And when you specify what you want to have returned, you don't have to make additional requests. So we will integrate that in our example. So user types in some data again, presses on the send button. Client sends a request to the server with the data and what data should be returned. And this is the important part. We specify what data we want to have returned. Then the server handles the data and looks for what data to return. Server then tells the client that the request was successful and returns the data that was asked for. And then the client tells the user the update was successful and shows the updated data. So as you can see here, we just have 1 request and 1 response instead of 2. So already a big update. Now, we improved the performance by a bit, but what we can now do is we can even improve the perceived performance, so how it looks like for the user. So this is how we could do it. Again, same example, user types in some data. The client sends a request to the server with the data and what data should be returned. And now this is the important part, directly displays the updated data. So this is called an optimistic update. What we're doing is we optimistically think, OK, the data that was put in, we already validated that on the client. It's probably the same as we have from the server. So we just set that in our state and show it in our application straight away, even before the application really returned something. The server returned the response. And the good thing for that is the user gets an application that is blazingly fast because we don't have to wait for the response anymore. This is especially useful when you have users that have a slow internet connection. But what you have to keep in mind is there are some edge cases that you have to handle. So first of all, what could happen? You make the mutation, and then the server says, OK, something was wrong, and gives you back an error. What you then have to do is you have to set back the state to the state it was before the update, before your optimistic update. This sounds complicated, but it actually is not, because most of the caching libraries like Apollo Client or URQL or React Query already have this functionality in place. So you basically say, OK, on an error, I just want to set back the state to the value it was before. Then there's another edge case. So you make an update, you make a mutation, and you get back a value from the server that is actually different to the optimistic update you set. What you then have to do is you have to use the value that you get back from the server and just set that one in state. But you have to be, it's not a good practice that this happens. It should actually be the case that the data is the same in the optimistic update and also in your server response. So if this kind of goes different ways, you should look for a fix that it is the same, because it should actually be the same. Yeah, and then we continue on with the data flow. So the server handles the data and looks for what data to return. As we did before, server tells the client that the request was successful and returns the data that was asked for. Then the client tells the user that the update was successful and shows the updated data. And if we now compare these three approaches, so first approach, the user gets back the data after the 9th step. We have 2 requests and responses. The second approach, where we use the return values of a mutation, the user gets back the data after the 5th step, and we now only have 1 request and response. And then when we use an optimistic update pattern, the user already sees the data after the 2nd step, and we also have 1 request and response. So the solution for that anti-pattern is, first of all, you should use the return values of a mutation and don't fetch again for the data, because otherwise you have 1 unnecessary request and response, and you could just use the return value, which makes it a lot easier for you and a lot faster. And even better, use an optimistic updates pattern to make the perceived performance better for the user. Now to our last anti-pattern, which is not a suitable caching library. This is from the React Query documentation about GraphQL. So keep in mind that React Query does not support a normalized cache. What is a normalized cache? Normalized cache is actually very similar to a relational database. So in a relational database, for example, when you want to save blog posts, you have a table where you have a blog post, and a blog post has a title, and it also has a body. And additionally, you also have an author who wrote the blog posts. But the author probably wrote a lot of blog posts, and because of that, it doesn't really make sense to save the author in the same table or in the same row. It makes more sense that you create an additional table for authors, and in that one you have an ID for the author, you also have the name of the author, and you also have maybe the website URL. And what you then do is you just reference the ID of the author in the blog post table. And this is actually how it also works in GraphQL, but very similar. Here we have the query again, where we want to get all the issues from the Apollo client repository and the author of these issues. So this is how we would expect the author to look like. Okay, we have an ID, we have the type name, we also have a logging, a name, and a website URL. But how it's actually stored in GraphQL is like that. We just store the reference to this user. And how this is done is, we first use the type name, in this case the user, and then the ID of the user to make a reference to this author. And then the author looks like that, and this is where we made the reference to. And why is this now cool? It's really cool because when you have different queries that are using the same reference to one author, for example, and one query gets updated, the other query just has a reference to this object, so it gets automatically updated as well. By not making any additional network requests or something, you just get an update for free, which is quite nice. So this is how it would look like. We again have the query on the left-hand side, where we get all the issues with the author, and on the right-hand side, we just want to get back one user called maxmu. And this is how the data is stored again. So we just, on the left-hand side, we have the author for this issue, where we have a reference to this user. And on the right-hand side, it's the same. It's not really stored, it's just a reference to the user itself. So when one of these queries is updated, the other one will be updated as well if they share the same values. So the solution for this anti-pattern is really simple, actually, because you just have to choose the right caching library. In our case, we did a not so clever decision. We chose React Query for caching GraphQL, and we're so invested in that one that we can't move away anymore. So sadly, we don't have a normalized cache. But if you're choosing a caching library for your application, I would recommend to get for Apollo Client or GraphQL. If you don't want to use normalized cache, you can also go for React Query, because except of the normalized cache, it actually works really well. But if you want this free performance updates, maybe go for one of the other caching libraries. And also quite important, you should provide in each query a type name and an ID, because this is used to make this reference to another object. So by fixing all these anti-patterns, our situation changed quite a bit. The loading spinners were quite faster, and our stakeholders could sleep again and were happy, and we as well. So I hope you also will be happy when you fix your issues or don't make the issues at all. Thank you.
I'm really excited to introduce the next talk, or actually I should say panel, because next up is going to be the front-end panel. The front-end panel is highly anticipated for JSworld Conference and JSworld Conference combined in 2024, and we're super excited to have it guided by our good friend and colleague Alexander Lichter. Alexander, we know for a long time, he's been helping us out with Vue.js Amsterdam, with JSworld Conference. He's a good friend of the Vue and the JSworld family, so we're super excited to make him elevate this panel for us. For you, I'm going to introduce the panelists of today. Minko Gechev from the Google team, Daniel Rowe from the Nuxt team, Anthony Fu from the Vite and Nuxt team, Shai Resnick from Quick, Ryan Carniato from Solid.js, and we hope you're going to have an amazing time listening to the front-end panel. Enjoy.
What a panel here. Have you ever been all together on stage?
The same time?
No. Never. Same time? Yeah. No.
Yeah,
okay.
No.
First
time.
Yeah. First time.
Yeah.
So you know, when we'll go off that stage here, we'll create a new super framework. You all know that. Yeah. So get ready. Right. It will be released on npm and JSR. Whatever will be announced over there. Doesn't matter. Now, of course, it's amazing. But before, who of you knows these people here? Can you briefly show? Okay. Let's try the other way around. Who does have no idea of anybody here? Okay, great. Then let's do a small introduction round just so everybody is aware what you signed up for here. And yeah, let's start right away.
Sure. My name's Ryan Carniato. Creator of the JavaScript framework, Solid.js. Signals, if you've heard of them, that's a big part of my work. And I like long walks on the beach.
Nice.
Sweet. Okay.
So I'm Shai Resnick. I'm part of the Quick team. I also run Hires.io, consulting and courses and all that stuff. And I'm also do improv and salsa dancing and all that stuff. Like we're sharing. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks. I'm Daniel Rowe. I lead the Nuxt team. Nuxt is a meta framework for building web apps built on Vue. I am a full-time open source maintainer and also have a few other projects as well, like Fontaine and Magic Regex. I live in Edinburgh and I have an extremely affectionate cat who prevents me from getting any work done, as far as I can tell.
Okay. My name is Anthony. Sorry. My name is Anthony Fu, and I'm the coding member of Vue, Vite, and Nuxt. And I also create a few open source projects, like VTest, SlideDiff, Uno CSS, if you heard about it. And I'm working at Nuxt Lab full-time on open source and on the framework team, Nuxt framework team. And it's my great pleasure to work with Daniel and Alex, and also, of course, the great open source community of us. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Minko. I work on Angular at Google, where I'm the product lead. And I love doing open source. I have a couple of open source linters in Go, in JavaScript, and other fun stuff on GitHub.
Amazing, yeah. And I'm the most irrelevant person here because I'm just asking the question and let the experts talk. So my name is Alex. As Anthony said, I'm also on the Nuxt team, but as I said, that's not really relevant for this panel. They are the person to speak, right? The people to speak. So after you know everybody, I'm more than sure you have lots of burning questions here. And if you have something that's really important, then ask them afterwards, because here's a big list of things. We only have an hour. I'm very sorry. But we'll start right away. We start with something very recent. Who of you folks over here is a big fan of PWAs? Yeah? Hands up when I say, yeah, a few. Okay, a little bit. And as we are in the EU, you all know what's happening right now of Apple trying to kill PWAs. I want to know what your take on not only the whole situation, but maybe also the future of PWAs is. What do you think?
That's a loaded question.
That's a tricky one. I mean, my experience with PWAs might be a little bit limited, although I was working for a company where our main product we were trying to make was a PWA, and this is back in 2018. I thought we'd be getting there, and it took 4 years for Apple to deliver notifications properly. And by that time, I wasn't working at the company anymore. So in some ways, I'm like not surprised we are where we're at. It's tricky. For a while, I know the web, and especially like the Chrome team and stuff, were really dedicated to making PWAs happen. I haven't heard as much conversation recently, so I don't know if people have more recent experience, but it feels like the web was a platform made for everyone, and like the potential of using PWAs as this bridge, because web's one of the easiest platforms to develop for, was a real opportunity. So putting restrictions on being able to do that seems worrisome.
Yeah, it reminds me of, so I was developing in Flex back in the day, and Steve Jobs decided to kill Flash on the iPhone, and then all of us moved to the JavaScript back again and figuring out how do we do stuff? We don't have types, we don't have, right? But back then, Flash was a proprietary thing from Adobe, and it made sense because Apple Message was bet on the web, right, on HTML5, and or like that future, and like, and the Flash is too slow and stuff. Now it's interesting because it's kind of like don't bet on the open web or on the open standards and stuff like that. I'm not really an expert on that, and don't know what like the future of like these technologies going to be, but maybe Minko knows more about that because he's from Google and he knows everybody. So yeah.
Should we go in a row, or we are going
wherever
to
you want? It's free discussion.
A spiral.
Go ahead. Talk as you feel.
I was thinking about PWAs. Now, definitely it's unfortunate that we will not be able to install PWAs on like iOS. Also, at the same time, PWAs, they introduce so many cool ideas and APIs to the web that are here to stay, like service workers. Like app cached evolved into service workers. That is better. We also have this more progressive loading of applications with something like an app shell that could be considered somewhat of an inspiration for even like maybe island architecture to an extent, just because we have parts of the page that appear quickly and everything else like pops up after that with the app shell. So I'm worried on one side that legislations and some like big ideas of certain companies could impact the web in a negative way, but also at the same time, PWA's ideas are going to continue being actively used in the web in the future. I'll pass it to you now.
Okay, yeah. Just to be clear, that I didn't raise my hand because I didn't hear the question. So yeah, I'm actually a fan. Yeah. So I'm the one that starts the project like Vite plugin PWA, and so I actually really looking into the PWA stuff. It's like I think that's web we know is a very good platform that's open and also like very universal. It can work anywhere. So, but like also like because like the default web is in a sandbox and with a limited capability compared to the native apps, but I think that's for my efficiency consideration. It's like we don't want to, but I'm a one man. Like I cannot build like 3 different apps or different platform, right? So I would definitely go first with web. So I think PWA is a great idea to get started with, And so yeah, I don't know. I kind of have a very mixed feeling about this Apple stuff, because like in iOS it's already not easy to do so. You need to instruct users in a very weird way to add the PWA. But yeah, so I hope this can get better soon, because these things probably still in progress. And yeah, we'll see.
I mean, I think philosophically, I'm absolutely 100% in favor of openness, and the open web is a big part of that. So I don't think it's a morally neutral concept. You know, what about the technical details? I think the core philosophy of making these things available is a really important one. And on that, I would say this isn't a story that's done. We are observing things unfolding. So there is an EU ruling, there's a response from Apple, which is honestly a terrible response. And it's been justified with a number of justifications, which I consider to be unreasonable, and a bit of a mockery of the thing. And I would expect we'll see a response from the EU. I would also really like to see a response from people, developers, people we know. We're able to inform and tell people about what is actually going on and what is at stake. Because that kind of public response will make a big difference, and it will be interesting to see how things then proceed. But I mean, when you consider that basically removing the possibility of PWAs actually makes a lot of things opaque. Look at the launch, for example, of, I think Threads might be a good example, the Meta-based Twitter replacement. And because it was released as app only, it was impossible to access anywhere but on a phone. That's an interesting thing. It would be a shame if that kind of opacity continued, like to take away access to people from new websites and platforms and technologies. So that's my spicy take.
I don't think it's that spicy, actually. I think we all agree here that like PWAs are important and they're part of a web, and we want to see them grow more and not being restricted. Also, I think there's a petition to sign, and I think it's important also for public figures like you mostly and others out there to raise their voice about that, because it's an important topic that affects all of us. Coming from a very heavy question from the start to something that's not less interesting for sure. While we stay at the web as it is right now, I'll come with a very simple yes/no question. We can go that right around. And we all know the web is changing every day, and we have a big part of this conference program about AI. So we'll start with, will AI cost you all the job? Very simple yes or no.
No. It depends.
Classic program,
right?
Yeah.
No.
Lost my job, right?
Will it cost you your job?
AI.
Sorry?
Will AI cost you your job?
No, I think, yeah.
No.
No. Okay, it depends on will be interesting, but for what it's worth, I asked this.
It will lose my current job, but my job will morph, right?
Change, yeah. That's the thing. We are programmers in the end. We tell a machine what to do, and if we write a prompt in an AI, we also anyway. The most interesting question with that is not more like, okay, will you all also lose your job tomorrow and next 10 years? I see a few people nodding here like, oh yeah, no. It's more interesting like, how will web development shape with AI in its place? Because right now it's used as assistive technology. I've seen people spawning up frameworks component from AI in like a meetup talk. Yeah, looking at some people here. And I would wonder, what do you think? How will AI influence the web, maybe content-wise, but also the work as a developer?
Should we go one by one?
No, please, feel free to discuss that. Whoever wants to go for it.
Okay.
I have a few thoughts. I see how it could help in two different ways. One of them is to improve our developer experience a little bit by automating the boring stuff, like scaffolding, for example, or figuring out some things for us. Back in the day, I was doing an exploration of predictive prefetching, and I see AI really helping us with we have very finely grained code loading, let's say, and AI could help us to be smart about loading this code. Let's say we run a model on the edge, and it tells us, oh, these chunks will work really well together. Maybe I can just combine them and ship them to the client. This would be a great use case. And so that's one of them, improving our developer experience. And the other one is improving user experience, just by making our apps smarter, using different AI SDKs.
Yeah. So in my talk, I touched it briefly. I talked about it briefly because I didn't have time left. But yeah,
Sorry about that.
no, it's okay. It was my fault. I forgot the internet. So Minko has been doing great things ever since like a few years ago, right? About the predictive prefetching, analyzing user analytics to feed to a model and analyzing that. And recently, like what I shared is like, can we do that for other stuff? Because I think as developers, what we love to do is to create. We are creators, right? We like to think about, okay, this component will be here and that, and how the user experience will be, and all that stuff, right? As a front-end developers or full stack and such. And there are a lot of manual tasks that we don't like to do, and that's what I call manual optimization of stuff, because the users are sad because of the slow loading times and all that stuff. So that's one aspect that AI could do. But I envision a future where we have an AI team member that can analyze maybe the usages anonymously of real users, and could figure out how to write the tests for us, and use those tests as like the testing ground for refactoring our code to be a more developer-friendly code, and know which parts could be totally removed because they are not even used, do A/B testing automatically. All the stuff that we need to do manually these days, it could do, and that's what I call automatic optimization. And that's, I think, will be a big part of our future, which we started with in Quick, like with the performance optimization or automatic optimization, and I think it's great to do it on a function level, like in Quick Insights, but I think it will expand to any aspect of optimization in our future.
I have to admit, my experience with AI is rather limited. I'm very much a mechanical kind of person. I'm always looking at like specific interactions. So for me, obviously, to this date, AI hasn't made a huge impact on the other side, assist tools. But I do wonder, just because of the type of technology that we've been building, a lot of the gap closing between server and client, due to other elements as well, that if AI could, I mean, we've seen a bit of it with like people generating like websites and components from it, but like, I guess I'm interested in seeing, because all these frameworks right now work on the server, spending an incredible amount of time looking at different serialization formats. Mm-hmm. That's like React server components, all the different like use server and all the server functions, Quick's closure extraction. I've been trying to think, are we getting to a point where AI can actually infect the end user, like user experience, like talk about actually the on the UX, like designer level, like real-time component generation being streamed through, like, because we have the ability to serialize all this stuff now, not just data, but components, promises, basically constructing in real time the interface that the end user wants as they interact with it. Now, I know that's really sci-fi, but
it's not that sci-fi, it's like a year from now.
Yeah, I know the last time I said that, because we made an April Fool's joke on Solid after React released the use hook, we're like, the create hook. And we're like, you just put create and then it'll make your app for you. And I kid you not, like 8 days after, it was April 9th, somebody from Builder, Steve, made a demo, and I'm like, oh, he just implemented it. So, yeah, you're right. This will happen sooner than I think. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting from a framework author's perspective, trying to anticipate these things. I mean, a lot of times I look at improving the core mechanics, looking at the language that we use in terms of how we design intent. Because if we can, there's still that element of capturing intent, right? Yeah. You want to make sure, whether it's from the end user, whether from the developer, you have to know what they're intending, and the AI has to read that. So while I'm not sure what that completely looks like, that's why I often like looking at the similarities between different tools and looking at the common language there, because today maybe we only have ChatGPT, but what does it do? It processes languages. In a sense, the language of UI, I think, is something that's tangible that people can look at. Yeah, you've already seen the carcinogeniization. If you look at React hooks, signals, ruins, these language level features are making all the frameworks look almost identical. We're getting to a point where I actually think this might turn into a language problem, and I think AI's ability to enhance from there becomes really interesting.
So on that thing that you said we would have, I gave a demo 2 days ago at a meetup of a Nuxt app built to be malleable, so to allow users to change it at runtime on the fly using natural language. And it's just a simple demo, but you can find it on my GitHub if you want to have a look. And it basically enables proof of concept, GraphQL schema, GraphQL query app, and basically users interact with it and say, can I see it as a table? What if you just show me I could only find a Rick and Morty API. Originally it was an e-commerce website, but the GraphQL endpoint went down, and so I changed it. Rick and Morty was what I found. And so users could say things like, can I see the episodes, and like what kind of, can I have a list of episodes with the significant characters in them, and the app would change to be different. Or that you could ask for like different colors or a different theme. And this is the kind of thing that absolutely you can build today. And particularly if you're very careful about scoping what you expose, rather than letting them just change the entire app, then that's probably something that's you could even ship. But I mean, I don't know. I think the whole question is, this is a fun question, but it's not a answerable question, because AI is just, or what we are calling AI at the moment, it's just a whole sort of movement in a direction which is sheer possibility. We haven't yet figured out what the limits are going to be. We have ideas about what they might be, but one thing is for sure, it's not going to, we are all tool users. Like, we are craftspeople. We'd like to think we're artisans. When we build things and craft things, we're trying to achieve a result with tools that we have got. And this is one really powerful tool that we might be able to deploy and use. It should hopefully make our lives easier. We might be able to use it to make end users' lives easier, and that's fantastic. And the more ideas we have to do that, the better. It's not going to do anything like get rid of our jobs or fix everything magically for us. But
jQuery will still be here.
jQuery will be here till I die, I'm sure of that. It's,
there's a new version even, right?
Yeah.
So we won't get rid of it.
I'm good.
All right, great. Yeah, to catch on it, I also think AI, like, we talk about the future, right? That's why we can't necessarily answer everything in detail, but we see a direction. I think that's the shape of the direction and its various different branches as well is pretty clear here. And I liked all the input on that question. But there were two things I want to catch up on. The first one is, Ryan was mentioning signals, runes, and so on and so on. And I was wondering, as most of you using signals, I know it's not that popular in Vue. I mean, we have refs, for example.
It's the same thing under...
Yeah, wait, exactly. But that's the point. They're same thing, but tiny bit different, implementation-wise. So the question is, there are efforts right now to standardize signals. And I was wondering what your thoughts are about the standardization process. Maybe some of you have been involved, seen that, and what you want to see outcome-wise for JavaScript ecosystem.
Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I am in that group. It's a tricky process, standardization, and it was something I was kind of torn with it initially, because I'm not going to lie, I usually never wait for anything to become standard before I do it. So like, it's always been a challenge. You know, I kind of like see something and then I just go for it and running full speed, and kind of slowing it down and figuring out how it works for everyone seems like a lot of work. But yeah, I mean, we've already, because of the adoption across the different frameworks, I think that there's a lot of potential when we can get to a point where we can have browser primitives, because like, yes, there's differences, but there's also an incredible amount of similarities. And like, some of the challenges that we've had over the years can actually be addressed with this kind of stuff. Like, people, like, we've had some version of signals in JavaScript at least since like 2010, like Knockout.js. Like, one of the complaints back then was, things are erratic, and it's not a it's not an unfair complaint because they were. We didn't have a lot of the guarantees we have in systems today. But on the same side, it'd be great if you could debug. If you've ever gone in your console and hit a promise, you can see how it continues. You can see the stack before and after the promise resolves. Having that kind of ability come into for reactive would be huge, because right now that's obscured for the user. It'd be great to see hey, this code is running because this changed. Once you get to a point where data flow is part of the actual design and part of the creation, it unlocks incredible things. We're just at the beginning of that. So having the official support seems very powerful and very important. Error traces, there's just so many pieces when it becomes native that we can all leverage. That being said, this pipe dream where it collapses all the frameworks into a single framework, I don't see that being necessarily very possible. I mean, trying to bring certain elements directly into the DOM or whatever, it makes it very challenging because there are opinions. People care about the templating. So I don't see it just erasing that, but if we can find those common building blocks, there's just so much potential there.
Yeah. It's death by committee most of the time, right? These ideas never come to fruition. Just observables, right? In the past, were part of the reason I think they, were introduced into the new Angular back in the day, was because they wanted to become a standard, right? In the web API, but it was blocked, and it was I also share Ryan's opinion of don't wait, just do it, and if it's good, people will use it, and then we end up with query selector natively, which is was the perfect solution, and it was a small enough solution. Signals have constraints sometimes. You need to know other stuff, but they are a super powerful tool, and I think that's why most of the frameworks adopt them is a core thing, and because, like Ryan said, they open up lots of possibilities. So I'm not that optimistic about any type of committee decision with lots of politics and all that stuff, but I'm super optimistic about Signals becoming a first-class citizens in all of the frameworks of the future and such.
To be fair, just so people are aware, if they aren't, there's representation from all the major frameworks in that committee. We have members from Vue, and we have Svelte, we have obviously Solid, Quick, this goes in there. I'm going to forget, there's too many, I'm going to forget them. I already have. React guys are in there. There's Ember even, you guys remember Ember? Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of prominent voices in there. Angular, Alex and Pavel, yeah, so I do think that in the past there's been some tension between frameworks and committees just because of things. They have pulled us all in, so I'm a little bit more optimistic than usual there, but
I think otherwise, without everyone giving opinions, it would be very difficult, because they would always be hey, why did you involve us as a major part of the developer community? So I think also it's a very good thing that also that TC39 group, it then said, hey, let's bring them all in. It might be a bit more difficult to find consensus, but at the end there's something everybody's happy about, and that's what all developers want to know.
But it's also worth saying that timescales just operate totally differently in framework land versus TC39 land, and that's not a bad thing, because whole entire frameworks are born and die before a proposal might make it through. I mean, look at temporal, for example. It's taken a very long, but that's not a bad thing. This is a language that is going to be developing over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's hard to roll back once you made it a standard, right?
And the other thing is, this isn't necessarily going to impact people a huge amount, except, I mean, it will make their lives better, but it's not like you're losing out in the interim, because this is going to be wrapped by frameworks anyway. So it's people were probably not going to be consuming this raw. This is probably going to be filtered down through other libraries and used under the hood by solid reactivity, I would guess, and Vue and so on. So I don't know. I think it's great. I think it's really fantastic that these are being considered to be part of JavaScript. I think that's really forward thinking, and I'm optimistic, and I think it would be great. But hey, I'm just naturally optimistic, maybe.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm pretty agree with that, and yeah, I think that if we have like a kind of universal layer of the reactivity across framework, that would help a lot, because I think I create a library called vuejs, which is a composable library for Vue, and I mean, like to maintain like 200 composable is a lot of work for me. But imagine that every framework would need to do that, and that would be a lot of things. Like for me, it's like if I always thinking about like making something universal so it can serve more wider audience, and also we have more contributor, more open source things, like we can collaborate together. And if we're having the universal layer like this, we can do a lot more things. Like from the library can be shared, or like I'm also like very into developer experience, and I'm building the next dev tool. And we were thinking to build a dev tool for Vue's reactivity tracking to see when and how the different React signals being triggered. And I mean, if this is going to be a standard, and this reactivity system can be baked into the browsers, or like we can have a universal library to a very nice graphically inspector of how reactivity goes. So yeah, I'm pretty looking into that.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone said, and also it's not, so the signals, there are different representatives, could be hard to agree on the exact semantics of the signals library, but something that might be easier to agree on is how signals are used, and come up with a more ergonomic like syntax, let's say, in the browser, specifically for a signal-like primitive. So I guess there are different things that we could all agree on that would improve the developer experience for a reactivity, shared reactivity story.
Yeah, I would like to take advantage of this question to share something that I think is important for us all as different framework users and framework authors, and as a JavaScript community in general, is this notion of it's good to have different opinions. That's how, on diversity of thought, that's how better solutions get created, and not always to try and consolidate. Plus, keep in mind, and that's what I really, really love about, all the people here in the panel are, all the communities of these different frameworks are open. You guys from Vue and Vite, and like writing tools that other frameworks could use, and sharing the same layer, and the general attitude of these communities is not I'm in my little soccer team that I'm a fan of, and I'm not using. It used to be, we used to come from a place where, back in the day, right, when you just, you're using Backbone, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think this is the right attitude as a JavaScript community members. In the end of the day, we're all one big JavaScript family, right? So I think keeping this attitude in mind, and it's okay to use this or this or this and have different opinions, but share those. I think this over a committee that have like politics and all that stuff baked in could lead to a more standardized solution between the framework authors, because I think, I can't speak for everyone, but I think at least the people here are on the same page of like, hey, let's figure it out on our own, because we care about the web and JavaScript in general, not just our own box, right? So it's just a message of collaboration.
So nice to see that everybody's nodding there, and there are some people applauding. Lovely. No, I also can't add anything to that. I think it's also a good signal to everybody. Sorry for the word pun, not intended.
Just pun definitely intended.
Definitely.
No, I've been preparing that for days.
Yeah. I wish.
Yeah.
I wish. Okay, you got me. No, it's really nice to see that message out here, because I think very often it's like, oh yeah, framework XYZ is better, but in the end we all want to build cool things. We're all creators, as was said before. And also that these panels like these are possible, and I hope there will be more in the future. It's really nice to see. So that's amazing. And coming from the working together on something for the whole community topic, we've seen lots of things that are more universally thought in the recent past, right? We've seen Vite, for example, come out saying, hey, let's cater all the frameworks, whoever want to. We can integrate. And now almost all the frameworks and meta frameworks are built on Vite. we've seen lots of other movements around that, saying not only across frameworks, but also across all the 14 plus runtimes of Node that we have right now. So things like UnJS, for example, it's also used under hood for solid start, for example, for analog as well, Nuxt. So I wonder, what do you think about these more universal and agnostic approaches? Because we all talk about different opinions are important. It's really good because it also drives innovation in a way, and competition, quote unquote, helps. But on the other hand, it's also nice to have like a universal layer, so frameworks and meta frameworks can like build on top of the same thing, like Vite, Nitro, and so on and so on.
For me, it's helped kind of, I actually show this in my talk, but I like looking at things in layers, because if you identify where you fit in the tree, you as the consumer, it's a lot easier, because it's funny, we have very different expectations of what we want out of the tools we use versus like what our customers expect out of us. So it's kind of funny where I sometimes feel like I have a double standard on that side. Maybe I'm a hypocrite, but like, you know, while I complain about, you know, stuff taking longer below, I still innately are going to try and generalize stuff for the people above me. So it's like, I do think there's a certain amount of tension there. There's a certain truth to the fact that if you build specific solutions, they can be more optimized for the specific case. But on the other hand, we don't get the I think the exercise of trying to generalize is how we discover where the real boundaries are, where the real primitives are, where we should explain things. These things shift over time too to make things a little bit more challenging, but I think it's important to go through the exercise. This is, again, why I spend so much time looking at lots of different solutions, lots of different frameworks, because it's only through that generalization I feel that you can actually understand the problem space enough to be able to model these things and find better ways to model these things. So even if in some cases those universal tools won't survive, or they'll be more optimized a certain way, or they'll lead to a certain thing taking over. Like, it's funny, like, example, like web components. They were something that were kind of thought like it would democratize it, make everyone, you know, be able to do it, and then we wouldn't need frameworks. But I actually think web components are probably responsible for making more JavaScript frameworks than any other thing they added to the browser. So like, there's this weird opposite effect, right? Now that you can do it, everyone just goes and makes their next standard, you know, the XKCD comics. So like, these things always exist at the same time in balance, and I think that's a good thing. Of course, I'm never the person complaining about JavaScript fatigue, so I mean, I'm not sure everyone feels this strongly as me, but I think, generally speaking, at least making the attempt to generalize is a good exercise to finding the best path forward.
Well done. That's it, I don't have anything to add. It's like a
I think we're probably all in favor of universal code. I will say that there's some interesting things that make different interpretations possible. So like the provider pattern is something you increasingly see, the provider or adapter. So when you're talking about deployment to different providers, or talking about, like Ryan gave an example of using unstorage in his talk, you can have different kinds of storage, KV, layer. Or if you think about like differences between Bun and Node in terms of how they access the file system, like you can imagine there are these different implementation details which can be abstracted away. And things like export maps allow you to do that at the sort of package level, where you can actually have an import that can point to a different file based on which JavaScript runtime is consuming it. So the Winter CG group, if you haven't come across them, they're definitely worth following. They're a collaboration of different runtimes, people interested in different runtimes, and there are keys that represent the different JavaScript runtimes, which are supported in, well, unofficially supported in export conditions in your package JSON, which allow the creation of an adapter layer for where you can't create something that's totally universal, like file system access, for example, but where you can actually expose code that works in the same way wherever it's consumed because of this provider pattern. I don't know how much that added, but that's definitely something that assists in this goal.
Yeah. Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's to say that if we have one problem, and that can be multiple solutions to that problem, and people will have different opinion, and what I'm thinking is like this has to reach a certain point that if we like experiments is good and we will find different trade-off. And at some points, like we might agree like a general solution or a general direction to something, and so that we can actually move to a higher level problem to solve. And so like if you see an example, like I think Vite initial branding itself as an opinionated build tool or something, but now like everybody is happy with that because like I think they still say some opinion, but people are saying that the opinion is good. And because like we have the built-in TypeScript support, and we do post CSS for you, and we do a lot of things, and that makes sense because we basically stand on the shoulder of the past generation of tool. Like for example, like Webpack make a lot of innovations, and people are trying different stuff, and then it figure out that probably those are things that we commonly needed, and we bundle it into a single foundation that then we can move to another problem to solve. So now we are kind of discussing about higher level framework and how we should do it. And while that's, yeah, I think it's just people with different opinion to experiment things. And while that's, I think it's always happened, but I think it may happen at different levels as the framework or the ecosystem grows, evolves.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's what I also wanted to say.
You stole his point.
It's
sorry.
it's great that we can, when we find something that works for everyone, we can focus on building like more complex things and share the foundation. That's great. And also, I don't think it's necessarily one or the other. We either like share like the same thing or like build competitive, like competing solutions, because we can revisit some of these decisions over time as well. If we see that something could be optimized in the future, we can just build an alternative solution. We can build an alternative solution and things will work. We can improve it. Like we can see that in the Node ecosystem. We have Dino now too. We revisited this shared layer. And another thing also, this helps with maintainability as well. I'm thinking about, let's say, Prettier uses the Angular template parser to parse HTML into format code. That's pretty cool. They don't have to maintain their own HTML parser. We have a team that maintains our compiler, and Prettier can just depend on it. Pretty convenient. Same with Angular using Vite right now. We don't have to maintain our own orchestration system. It's great.
Yeah, and sorry to be the Care Bear here on the fluffy lovey-dovey, but that's the point that I tried to make before, where we're talking about evolution, right? Always for evolution to happen, we need to experiment and then consolidate, and like Anthony said, move to the next thing or the above layer and such. But in order for that to happen, we need to be humble and we need to be sharing is caring attitude. The attitude is more important for our advancement or how fast we can go in this evolution path than the trying to be the smartest person in the room or clinging to your idea or thing and thinking about the better of everybody. But it's like trying to identify the evolution and where things are going and what can I drop now and what can I focus on later. Just to add the fluffy, lovey-dovey thing.
But I think it's very important because I've talked about it before a little bit as well with some people. We're like, okay, it's so nice if you have a super smart solution, but if you can't bring it across and we welcome the community because you don't have the attitude for that, then yeah, people won't notice, people won't see. So there are lots of points of not only having a good solution, but also being able to share it with the people. And then it starts with, okay, hey, I work on a cool thing here. And you might find more people being interested in that, working with you together, build up a team. And then we start at being not only a one-man project, but a bigger thing, a community. And this is what helps growing projects, frameworks, libraries, open source in general. Like, it's not only about the smart hats behind it, right? It's in the end about the whole community and building that up as well.
Yeah, that's the spirit of open source,
basically,
in the end of the day.
And if you haven't contributed yet, that's your chance. Any of the frameworks and libraries, that's an option.
Yep.
Right? Documentation, no code, and so on and so on. Nevertheless, we don't have that much time left, unfortunately. We have roughly 10 more minutes. And I wanna go 2 quick questions. We talk about the future of front-end, and that involves JavaScript, of course. I mean, hopefully for the next few years, right? I was wondering if you have any features in JavaScript that might be on the rise, like stage 0, 1, 2, 3 proposals where you're like, hey, that would be cool, or maybe something that you had in mind, like, hey, it would be nice if that would be part of the standards. And no, signals don't count, so we talked about that already. So if you have something where you're like, hey, I'd be super excited to see that, maybe use case, or like why you're excited about that, that's your time to share that.
Let's start from there, because we always start here.
Yeah, sure. Let's start over there.
Oh, I was ready to be last, so I thought I have more time to think.
Sorry. I can start if you want, to give you
whoever wants to first, yeah.
Sure, go ahead, Tao.
Okay. So I've been like mostly like living in a cave now and thinking about a lot about the evolution and how things. I'm not like well versed in like the what's in level 3 or like what's about to be released and such. But what I would love to see a future where at least from our point of view in Quick is like we call it it's a metaphor like JavaScript streaming, but the underlying thing here is the ability to chunk up your code into the function level and have it being smartly streamed or refactor or collected, like statistically collected or stuff like that. If that was like a native in the browser, or because it will shift our whole thing, because everything become async now, right? And you point to a closure or a scope level variable, and you're crossing a boundary. So it's like changing a bit the mentality. But I would love to to see that becoming something more like used, and that way like other frameworks could use it as well. But I don't know how it's possible, but that's the problem domain that we are looking into. So yeah.
Very interesting one, yeah. I would also like to see that actually. That would be great.
Obviously, Tailwind CSS built into the browser would be ideal.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, I see some fans over there. Yeah. Adam, if you're watching that, that's your chance.
I'm interested, actually, more seriously. I'm really looking forward to types as comments. That will be even just a nice developer experience thing that I can copy and paste some TypeScript code and run it in the browser console. That will feel nice. I think, was it Firefox that just unflagged CSS nesting support today?
Oh.
Someone unflagged CSS nesting support.
Lovely.
I haven't, but yeah. Like that's also that's a really nice new feature that's coming or has come. But in general, I'm quite content with what is available in the browser tooling.
Yeah. I guess I'm excited what we're going to see happening on the edge, because this seems to be like a very helpful thing. I'm thinking we are building solutions for business problems that people have. That's what is driving web development to a big extent. Like people started building large web applications. That's why we had to deal with deferred code loading, with lazy loading and dynamic imports. And I see just these applications becoming even more immersive and larger. So I guess code loading and work on the edge would be something that I'll be really curious to follow.
Cool. If I could throw one more in, async context. How can I not mention that? Were you also thinking, like basically being able to track across async boundaries, a sort of, you can actually store data and retrieve it, and it enables incredible things. So for example, in Vue, so maybe too specific, and Ryan probably has a better example, but if you're rendering something synchronously, you can set a context, for example, and you just retrieve it. Everything is sort of single-threaded. But the moment you have an async boundary, you can now have, there's a bit of code that's being run, and then a bit of code from maybe another request that's being run, and then a bit of code from a different, like these things are out of order. And so it becomes much more difficult, for example, to have any kind of global state, because you're constantly having to sort of, oh, I better unset it, and now I'll reset it for this next bit of code which is running in that context. But then the moment this bit of code, which is from a fresh request, am I making any sense? Like it becomes very problematic for lots of reasons. And even on the client side, in the browser, for example, it can be more difficult to track what initiated a promise that is only now resolving. And you can't necessarily, actually there's been some real good work in DevTools to enable you to trace back a lot better, but it is still possible. But on the server, we now have support for async local storage in Node and Node 20?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of the version.
But
no. So async local storage, which is not the that one's been in Node for a long time.
That's true. Sorry, I mean.
But now, as of this year, we got support of it in Cloudflare runtime. I'm forgetting the other Dino. Basically, most runtimes now support a version of it, except not in the browser. So we're seeing a lot of meta frameworks moving into it because, pulling the request out inside of our fancy server functions and stuff is actually a huge problem, and this is what lets it being transparent. So async context, like an official spec for it, would be amazing.
Yeah.
I actually had one more myself, or two more. I'm really interested in the import module stuff, import meta and inline modules. Again, these features people probably aren't reaching for every day, but doing stuff like server functions, server components, all these things, kind of weaving in workers. We're getting to a point now where they're working on solutions even into the browser, into the spec that actually can let these things be co-located. It'd be interesting. Maybe we won't need use server or use client. It could actually just be part of the actual module spec.
Yeah, that's exactly the discussion that we had before about there's a lot of innovation happening with the server components, React server components, and we talked about the philosophy of automatic optimization versus manual optimization, and it seems like adding a decision point for the developer to decide where this is a server component or this is a client component is on the UX side is better because then you could be fine-grained about stuff, but on the developer experience side it's more challenging because then you need to learn more context and then add more decision point. So I really want a future, and we had this in the Quick Heroes Discord chat about should we add it to Quick or something like that, but then it's taking us outside of the philosophy of automatic optimization, right? So I really wish for the future, and we didn't solve it yet, but for all the frameworks to have the framework decide for you whether it's a server component or a client component and optimize. I know that Ryan thinks it's not possible, but we'll see.
That's the future of the front end, right?
Yeah.
And the back end way too.
Yeah.
Any other features?
Yeah. I'm actually a little bit hesitated about my take because I'm probably going to pivot. I pretty much agree of what you said, but while we were discussing about web, I'm always thinking about a little bit about off the web. It's you must be travel from all over where. If you take a plane, you must experience the frustrating when with no network or very low network. So what I'm thinking is I would like to see more apps has the local first philosophy. I'm not so sure if it's a application level thing or it's an infrastructure thing, but I think there's a lot of things that we haven't figured out yet. So it's probably worth to have some effort from the infrastructure level. But if we are able to, that's also why I'm a little bit frustrated about the PWA stuff. But we are not going to back to discuss about it. But so we would like to see more about how we should do about more efficient local first, or if we can have a local first as a default of our web application things or something. So I'm also looking forward to that to see if we could have actually a better user experience.
Amazing. Okay. It's almost time. We have one last question. Remember, I made a joke in the beginning saying, we'll build our super framework here on stage. It's time to do that. It's a very quick one, so each of you has to pick
quick one. Okay. So. Say what there.
Okay. Good one. So each of you has to pick one feature for framework that should go in, just one, and then we have it. Then we'll build it. Very simple.
Wow, you have an hour?
We have exactly 30 seconds. No, I'm kidding. Let's go.
Fine-grained rendering.
Provider agnostic deployment.
JavaScript streaming, you know.
Or I'll be like mature and boring, stability and reliability.
I don't know. Plugin system?
Plugin system. Here we have it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the future of the front end. Give a warm round of applause to our panelists here. Thanks a lot for sticking. And if you have any more questions, hit these guys up right over there. Thank you, everybody.
Unfortunately, that was our last talk of tonight. I hope you enjoyed JS World, and if you wanted to watch more recordings or have missed out on a few, don't forget to look out on our website, JSworldConference.com, where you can see all our recaps and all the videos that we have for you. Make sure to check it out and hope to see you at JS World 2025. See you.